Start now. Let's start it up. All right. Okay. Hello. How's everybody doing? Let's do this. Oh my gosh. All right. How's it going?
Hello. Oh, we got Harrison here. Great.
Yeah, so today we are going to be talking about free speech and, of course, this rising trend or this rising new commodity of residential school denialism. I see Harrison Faulkner of True North News is here with us, and you recently had your because I know, Jim, that we want to get to your story of being a teacher who was fired back in 2021. But if you don't mind, Jim, would it be all right if we got Mr. Harrison to speak first, because he can't stay for that long? Is that okay with you, Jim? All right, let's get Mr. Harrison Faulkner up here. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to kind of collect everybody who has been how do we say this, have been canceled or censored or hated upon for questioning history, for questioning the official narrative of residential school denialism as sort of formulated by the media institutions and political ruling class. And Harry, maybe you could kind of fill in the blanks, but I'll give a quick sort of summary of what I understand of the situation, which is you were talking to certain indigenous people who had an interpretation of history, which actually dared to give some sympathy to the residential schools in question, or possibly just shedding some doubt on the sort of oversimplified version that it's all about genocide and killing Native kids from the past. Did you want to kind of fill in the blanks for us, Harrison? Because I know that there was kind of like a cancel campaign as well with journalists probably reporting this particular podcast on Spotify and then getting the actual Spotify episode podcast taken down for questioning history.
Yeah, that's right. So basically, we had an interview with a man named Rodney Clifton, and Rodney Clifton lived at and worked for a residential school, 2 residential schools, actually. He met his wife, who was a student at the residential school he worked at, one of them in Alberta and one of them in the Northwest Territories. And he's a professor. He works at the University of Manitoba. This is not somebody who is talking without an understanding of the situation, not somebody who doesn't have a background to talk about these issues. He has written extensively about Indigenous issues. And of course, he has a deep personal and family connection to the residential school system.
You could maybe even say he was an expert on.
Right, exactly. He was an expert, but Greg, he was the wrong type of expert, which I'm guessing will be what is discussed on this space tonight. But what happened was, I wanted to have a conversation with him about the good things that happened at these schools, because not everything that happened at these schools was bad. There was a lot that was bad. There was more bad than there was good. And my belief is that the residential school system as a policy was a failed policy, because the conditions of Indigenous Canadians today, that they live in today, the majority of them, are not positive. It's bad. And so clearly, if the idea behind the residential school system was to integrate them and to give them, was to put them on in a stronger economic position, that was a failure. Now, regardless of that, and regardless, besides all of what we know of all the bad things that happened at these schools, all the abuses that happened, many people who went to these schools, including my guest's wife, look at that time very fondly and have good things to say about those schools. And you can find endless examples of people talking about all the bad that happened, but you can't really find much at all about people talking about the good things that happened at these schools. So that was the objective of the interview. And my guest made it very clear that he believes some good things happened and some bad things happened. This was not, a denialist perspective. It was simply a discussion on the history of what happened. Ultimately, what happened was that nobody took any issue with it. It didn't even get that many views. It didn't get that much attention for the first 2.5 weeks that it was released. Ultimately, it caught the attention of the anti-hate. I'm not going to say the anti-hate network, but the journalists that surround the anti-hate movement in Canada. It caught their attention, and through some activism and some emails to Spotify ended up pulling the podcast from the platform, citing hate speech, citing not even just hate speech, but even worse, really, citing that this was violent rhetoric. And so we just basically use it as an opportunity to further the reach of the conversation. YouTube hasn't pulled it because it isn't hate speech. Even YouTube, of all places, hasn't pulled it. It's still up on X. It's still up on YouTube. It's still up on other places. Spotify pulled it down because activists took an issue with it, and they tried to silence this conversation from being had. So that's really what happened. And it's a remarkable story. And it's really, I think it speaks to this attack on free speech that we are all living through right now, which is only going to get worse with Bill C-63.
Well, hopefully that's not going to pass, that bill, because it would really, really, truly be a nightmare. That's why I started SaveFreeSpeech.ca. I really appreciate you checking out our website and featuring it on in your video on Bill C-63 as well. Have we seen sort of resistance to this, like mainstream resistance of like, hey, this podcast has been censored and taken down for simply the wrong interpretation of history? Have we seen any conservative figures with a platform, conservative politicians of any stripe, speaking up for you or kind of calling out this flagrant censorship in the name of stopping hate?
No, and I think that shouldn't be surprising to anybody because it was the entire House of Commons, if you will recall, that, in my opinion, shamelessly voted alongside Leah Gazan's motion back in 2021, condemning the country for committing genocide. Something you do in the House of Commons that you can't come back from. Once you make that statement, once you've decided to stay silent on a motion like that and allow it to unanimously pass, that says a lot. And this is an issue that nobody wants to fight. I've been surprised really about the direction and the approach that many establishment conservative figures have decided to take on this issue. To highlight, well, frankly, let's just reframe this. To say that the residential school system was not a genocide, and to combat claims that it was a genocide, and to stand up for Canadian history and stand up for the truth, is not denying the residential school system. And it's not a bad thing to do. It is a good thing to do, because standing up for the truth is what you have to do. If we just wish that this issue would go away quietly, and we just hope that once we allow, we're not going to fight this issue. We're going to allow the far left in Canada to accuse everybody of committing genocide, accuse the country of being illegitimate and being founded on racism. They'll eventually stop, and we'll all just be able to move on with our lives. They won't stop. They won't stop unless an effort is put up and a defense is put up of Canadian history. Because this residential school system now, but they'll keep going for different issues. They'll keep going after different historical figures and different historical events and keep twisting the narrative. So people don't want to fight this who are in the mainstream, if you could call them that. I think that's a big mistake. But I will also say, just give it time. Look at where we're at now with immigration. This was the issue with immigration for a long time. Establishment conservatives didn't want to fight about it. But with enough pressure, eventually people do start speaking up. And I think, Greg, with the pressure that you're putting on with Bill C-63, it'll get more attention. It's required. And I think that with this issue, if there is enough pressure, and it is smart pressure, it's not out and out denying something that we know to be true, but it is saying that this was not a genocide, and it was saying that you can't go around and claim that mass graves were found in residential schools, which is not true, obviously. If enough people start defending history and defending the truth, then mainstream conservatives might eventually start speaking up.
Yeah. And it really does feel sort of patently absurd, the direction that things are going right now, where it's almost like all citizens of the country are under some sort of test, like they're students, like it's a history test. And it's like, if you get that, if you got the fact wrong, you're in trouble. And it's like that. I'm sorry. Like, are we allowed to be, let's say, just for sake of argument, let's say we got it wrong. Is that so bad? Just to get the facts wrong on history? Like, we all need to be super up to snuff with our Canadian history. And it's funny because, I don't know how thorough the sort of, citizen test is right now for newcomers or immigrants. But it's funny that even if you've lived here your whole life, if you get this question wrong on the history of residential schools, then you will be condemned for it. But I do want to go back to something because, I'm constantly doing research. I've been tumbling down this rabbit hole of Canadian politics for, it's only been 5 years, but it's felt like at least a decade here. But you mentioned, and I must have missed this, you said that they passed a motion in Parliament for basically everyone to agree that, yes, it was genocidal. And I solemnly swear as a conservative MP that it was genocide and we're genocide. Could you kind of revisit what that motion specifically was? Because I find that very very interesting. Because you basically said this is why a conservative politician will not go back on this sort of pledge they made to this version of history. Am I getting this right?
Absolutely. This is extremely important. And I think that, I look at this decision the same way I look at, and this is all happened under Aaron O'Toole's leadership of the party. But I look at this the same way I believe it's called Bill C-4, that trans bill where the conservatives voted for it. And once you make that statement, you really have a lot to answer for. This motion was a unanimous motion that Leah Gazan, the woman who is now pushing the residential school denial bill, she proposed a unanimous consent motion declaring the residential school system to be genocide. And not a single member of Parliament in the House of Commons spoke out against the motion and opposed the motion, meaning it passed unanimously. And it's basically the government condemning itself for genocide. And the reality is here, I'm not a historian. I'm not a trained historian, but historians completely oppose this idea that the residential school system was genocide, and they back it up with significant amounts of evidence and very strong arguments. They do not believe the residential school system was genocide. I agree with the historians. It was not genocide. But not a single member of Parliament, no Conservative, no Bloc Québécois member, clearly no Liberal or NDP member either, opposed this NDP motion declaring the residential school system genocide. And that is why you will see Jagmeet Singh, for example, very casually throw around the word genocide whenever it comes to the residential school system. Not even Justin Trudeau will do that in his social media posts. Jagmeet Singh does it because that is the direction that the NDP have decided to take. The most radical position on this.
And is the sort of phrasing and verbiage of this motion that simple? Residential schools were genocide, period? Surely there's like something more specific than that. Like it's just residential school equals genocide. That was it? Do you know?
Yes, absolutely. You can search it up, and I'm going to try to find you the article. And yes, that's exactly what it was.
Okay.
Residential school
right.
Genocide motion from 2021. MPs back motion calling on government to recognize the residential school program as genocide from the CBC.
Right. And while we have you here, again, I'm always trying to do more research and understanding how this system, this amazing system here in Canada works. A motion is not a bill. It's not legislation, but what does it really mean? Like, is there sort of legal ramifications for it, or it's just sort of like an official footnote that's made in our parliament? Like, do you know what I'm asking? Like what is the real significance of a motion, and how can it be used, I guess, in the future, if not just for some sort of like piece of paper with a talking point of like, we agreed on this?
Well, it is symbolic, but it's also extremely important, because Leah Gazan, the woman who proposed that motion back in, it was October of 2022, not 2021. Leah Gazan went on, I believe it was CTV last weekend, after she had proposed the legislation to criminalize residential school denialism. And she brought up her successful motion from 2022, saying all the MPs agreed this was genocide. So why would anybody now oppose a bill that would criminalize people who disagree that it was a genocide? So she used the motion. She's now using the motion to bolster her argument to pass what is clearly, or to attempt to try to pass what is clearly a constitutionally, a violation of the Canadian Constitution, and completely ridiculous censorship legislation on history. So it's symbolic, this motion, but it's written in Canadian history now that this specific parliament said this about the residential school system, and it can be used to silence anyone who wants to speak out about it. So it's deeply significant.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Harrison. I do want to move on to Jim, but just one last question before you go. Let's talk about this sort of immense pressure that politicians and I guess the Conservative Party were under back then. And I guess like this insane sort of, I like to call it this sort of incestuous relationship between the Canadian media and the political class, where, it takes 2 weeks for them to convince us all to stay inside during lockdowns. It takes 2 weeks to convince us all that our history is genocidal, and everybody in the Parliament buildings agrees with it. If we look back when that happened, it was, 100, however many bodies were found in Kamloops, and all of this was kind of happening. Why do you think it's just so easy for the Conservative Party to just kind of cave to this media pressure? Or maybe you could just kind of comment on this sort of like zeitgeist that our entire country is under with the sort of like just being so obedient to anything that the CBC News or CTV News says to us.
I think, two things immediately jump out to me. The first is that the Conservatives don't feel any competition or pressure to their right. So they're not concerned about appeasing their base, and not even just appeasing their base, but they're not even concerned about abandoning their base on these issues, given the legacy media have so much influence and they use it to bash the heads of conservatives into submission over. So I think that's one thing. Their perception is that they don't have any pressure to their right, and they're not concerned about losing support to a party which they don't see as competitive. I think the second thing is that in our system, at a political level, as everybody knows, MPs cannot vote out of line with the direction of their party leader, which I think is a bad thing for our system, obviously, because an Ontario Conservative MP from the GTA thinks completely differently on specific issues than a rural Manitoba Conservative MP would. And that's perfectly normal because Canada is a very large country. And however, both MPs will have to vote exactly the same way if that's what the leader wants. If the leader says we're voting this way and we're not going to allow any free votes, well, that's just how it is. And they never allow free votes. Rarely will they ever allow free votes. So MPs just have to fall in line. And this trickles down into what MPs can say. These conservative MPs are not allowed to do interviews. They're not allowed to post what they want to post. Everything has to go through Pierre Poilievre's office. Everything has to be, centrally governed. And so you're really not going to get to see the differences. You're not going to get to see MPs expressing how they really feel on specific issues. And I came to that realization quite late, but it makes a lot of sense now when you think about how many conservatives have operated over the past, 5, 6, even 7 years. Until they get the go-ahead from the top, they're not going to be able to speak on certain issues. This is one of them for sure, but it's a trickle down. It goes on to all the other issues.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that analysis. You said a lot of very powerful things there, or important things there, I should say, that there's not enough pressure from the further right. They can't even speak freely. Blink twice if you're being held hostage, conservative MPs. Are you in danger? But this is part of another conversation, but maybe we could have it offline. I would love to kind of ask how I could try to make this Save Free Speech project work to apply the right pressure to the Conservative Party, coming from mostly a right-wing perspective, although I think freedom of speech should be a left-wing thing as well. But
can I just ask one question? These are two separate bills, the denialism and the Bill 63, right? They're two different.
Correct. Bill C-63.
Okay. So it wouldn't fall under the guise of 63. It was a separate.
It is a separate bill, but it would have profound free speech implications.
Well, exactly. So I'm just wondering, if it's criminalizing, would you be charged the same way under Bill 63? I don't know the parameters.
Yeah.
Of that.
So unfortunately, there's actually a legal precedent for Bill C-413, as there's already Holocaust denialism on the books.
Right.
So they use the exact same verbiage. So it's kind of like just tacking on a new sort of denialism bill, which is, if I get the verbiage correct, would be considered criminal to downplay, deny. There's another word they use of the residential schools equals genocide narrative. So needless to say, a lot of the people featured on this space could easily get charged with criminal speech charges for what they believe.
Exactly. And I could have been charged on Monday. So go ahead. Maybe we'll go to Jim now if we're done with.
Yeah, we're going to go to Jim. But thanks a lot, Harrison. If you want to have any last words before you go, or how we could apply pressure with SaveFreeSpeech.ca, let me know just before you leave.
Yeah, I gotta bounce, but thanks for doing this, Greg, and thanks for also advocating against Bill C-63. It's extremely important. Awesome.
Amazing. Thank you, Harrison Faulkner of True North. Thanks for stopping in. Appreciate it. Appreciate what you're doing there as well. We're going to move on to Jim McMurtry, Abbotsford teacher, fired for refusing to lie to kids. And if I'm not mistaken, Jim, you're really the canary in the coal mine here. In 2021, I'm pretty sure around the same time that this news first broke of a whole bunch of bodies found in Kamloops. And in your testimony, you said it only took 30 minutes from you saying something in a classroom from you being dragged out. If you could, Jim, kind of just tell your story from the beginning of like when this news hit the headlines to, when you made comments in class and then what happened after that. But thanks for joining the space, by the way. How's it going?
Well, it's wonderful to be here. I have the unhappy distinction of being the first person that may not have been the first person to have thought that this was outrageous, what the news that was coming out of Kamloops, but it was the first person punished. But I was right there at the start. So the press release from the First Nation band in Kamloops was on May 27. That was a Thursday. News started to trickle through schools and so forth, and they made a big deal about it right across Canada on Monday. And I was teaching Calculus 12 at the time, and I was asked by the principal, as were all the other teachers, to talk about residential schools. And the narrative circulating was that there was torture and murder and all sorts of things. And I just said one thing that went against the zeitgeist, the word that you used earlier. And within half an hour, I had two male vice principals leading me out of the building. I got angry as I was being taken into the parking lot, and I said, I've just changed my mind. I'm not leaving. Make it easier for you guys if you allow me to speak to the principal. And the principal said nothing, and nobody said nothing to me for 3.5 years. So I paid. I feel that not only have I, again, was the first punished, but I think I have been probably the most punished. I know there are people before me, like the Senator Lynn Beck and so forth, who was pushed out of the Senate for very much the same thing, which was questioning any Indigenous narrative. The same year, 2021. So that's my story. I stood my ground. I'm someone who has a PhD from the University of Toronto. My father was the Chief Justice of Ontario. We had many conversations about Indigenous education, about Indigenous law and history and so forth. I've never met anybody up until 2021 who ever said, even some of the things that were said by Harrison, which is that there was more bad than good in residential schools. I object to that statement. I've tremendous fondness and respect for Harrison and everybody else that say that, but it's just simply not true. The schools wouldn't have lasted for almost 150 years if they weren't doing a good service. It was an educational right for children to go to school. Their parents signed application forms. Residential schools are only for those that couldn't or go to day school or didn't live near a day school. And in addition, there were orphans and kids with the necessities of life who were put in residential schools. I think the teachers did a tremendous job considering the circumstances and pay and the type of child that they got. Many of these children came to residential schools with disease, many of them from home lives where there was tremendous abuse, including sexual abuse. And I think teachers did their best. Obviously, there are some teachers that did things they shouldn't have done. And there was one priest, 143 schools over 141 years, really over 400 years, because the first residential schools began almost to the day 400 years ago in Quebec. And they had different names in the past, including industrial schools and so forth. But we had a long history of trying to educate Indigenous children. I'm very proud of that history, as is Harrison. And I think it's wrong to condemn them in any way whatsoever. Mistakes were made, and we've learned from those mistakes. But I think what we need to do is not speak about schools that were in our country a long time ago without having any knowledge. I'm someone who has knowledge. Harrison had, as he said, Rodney Clifton on someone who was at those schools. I have met many teachers. I have met many students who were in attendance. And I never heard anything of the sort of physical or sexual abuse, and certainly not genocide, until it became de rigueur, really sort of in following up from what happened in 2020 in the United States with George Floyd, that Trudeau and others are looking for a George Floyd moment, as an interesting sort of spiritual repentance that we had to say we were bad in order to be carried to the promised land by virtue signaling Savior Trudeau. I think residential schools are not a stain in our country, but an example of all the good that we have tried to do to lift up all people in this country, whether the people that were here long before Europeans, and including the people that have come as recently as today. I think Canada is a country that's honorable.
Yeah. So Jim, take us back again to just that scenario. You know, you said something. Did you say you were in a calculus class when something was said? And how do you think what you said got back to these two vice principals who came in to, you know, walk you out of the classroom?
First, I need to apologize, because it's when you lose your livelihood over something like this, it does tend to make me perhaps overly ripe in my passion. So thank you for keeping me in line a little bit. So the problem was very simple. The kids at the school and in all other schools right across Canada have been told for a number of years now that residential schools were equivalent of houses of horror or of the Auschwitz or other death camps run by Nazis, which is simply not true. So I don't blame the student. There are a lot of students that are encouraged to snitch and to sniff out orthodoxy in schools in recent years. There's as you know, there's a new ideology that's firmly in place and has different names. I'll use the name wokeism, but postmodernism or whatever. Sure. But the kids are told that white Canadian society is racist and vicious and full of darkness. And I don't blame the kids that reported me. There was one girl went down and talked to a guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor went to the principal, and the principal right away went to the board. And I was out of the school before anyone talked to me.
Wow. Wow. That is that's wild. You say that you don't blame the kids, and I guess you just why do you say that?
Well, thank you for asking. And, I am a teacher, so I like to make reference to the fact that what I'm saying to you today is really very much from, through the lens of being a teacher and I think of students. And if students were told by our society, gosh, newspapers were talking about 215 human remains of children, some as young as 3, being buried by classmates secretly at night and placed in a mass grave. That's what that's the diet they were fed. So I certainly don't feel any animus to students who didn't like what I said. And again, I said it was disease that struck down most kids that were in attendance at these schools, as in other schools. Tuberculosis ravaged Canadian society.
Mm-hmm.
And there was more tuberculosis on reserves than in these schools. These schools ended up inoculating the kids before other Canadian kids were inoculated. They had regular visits from nurses and doctors. Kamloops School had a sanatorium for tuberculosis patients about 20 minutes drive away. The idea that nuns and priests were trying to kill kids is just so absurd, because they were doing the opposite. They were ahead of their time in trying to keep kids healthy and safe and alive.
Okay, so like Faulkner said, I'm not a historian either. Would you call yourself somewhat of an expert on this history and these stories of like burying their own classmates at night? Would you call these lies, or what would you call that? And where do you think it comes from? These tall
You're
tales?
asking excellent questions, and the one at the end is the one that interests me most, where it comes from. But I'll answer your first one, and I'll try and answer all the questions, and very, very briefly here. That when I went to university, I studied Indian education policy, and I did my master's thesis on it. And I also took courses that related to all educational history, as I did as I said, my doctorate at the University of Toronto. I worked under the University of Alberta for my master's, a man named Robert Carney, who is the father of Mark Carney, who people know. And he was considered to be the leading expert in residential schools. And what his particular emphasis was in talking about residential schools was how many kids were there because they had nowhere else to go. That residential schools even had adults there because there were adults that had nowhere else to go, and the schools fed them and sheltered them. So they were, if you look at today's statistics, about half the kids in some provinces, some more than half, that are in government care are Indigenous. So this is not, the residential schools were the precursors of government child welfare, and so they looked after kids, and they didn't always have the easiest kids, and again, things went wrong, but I don't blame the teachers or the intentions. And also, I should just quickly mention before I answer the most important question here, is in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, the Indigenous authors like Murray Sinclair talked about the schools having good intentions and having many good accomplishments. And so that's page 128 of the final report. So the really interesting thing here is you're asking, why would people say something that isn't true? So yes, to answer one of your questions, I believe they're lies. It's not true. Ghost stories. Now, why would they have ghost stories? And I think the best explanation for this comes from a colleague of mine on there's a national pan-Canadian research group called the Indian Residential School Research Group. And there's a woman there named Michelle Sterling. And her explanation relates to trauma, that these kids did not go to residential schools for the most part without having already experienced a great deal of trauma, particularly in the 1880s and 90s when there was a lot of starvation. Even before that, when before they were officially called residential schools in 1883, when there was smallpox. And of course, later you had Spanish flu, and you had all sorts of other things like alcohol, the problem of fetal alcohol syndrome, and more recently, drugs and so forth. So finally, wrapping this up, why is this Well, when people have trauma, and I talked to a friend yesterday who worked in and on reserves for most of his adult life. He said that he asked me, he said, Jim, how many kids do you think at some of these reserves were sexually abused on the reserve? And I said, well, I think in some cases as many as 40%. And he said to me, you're wrong. He said almost every child. So what's happened in many reserves because of poverty, as Harrison Faulkner was saying, because of drugs and alcohol and suicide and despondency and economic social dysfunction, family dysfunction, and unemployment, all these different things, they came together as a horrible toxic cocktail. And it's really hard for kids. And that's why when I was in school, I didn't understand when I was a student how there could be students and residents and schools and native reserves as sniffing glue or photocopier fluid and so forth. And so I think their kids have a lot of trauma. And I think it's easy to point fingers at the residential schools. And of course, some kids did have a bad experience at residential schools. For some of them, it was hard to be away from family and community. And I'm not an apologist for the schools at all, but I think the intentions were good. And I think when people make up false stories, even the orange shirt story is false. The girl Phyllis Webstad never went to a residential school. She blames nuns for taking away her shirt. There were no nuns at the hostel she was staying in Williams Lake. And as far as graves, as Harrison Faulkner also said, there's no graves that have been found anywhere of missing children, let alone murdered children. So yes, these are lies. But I think many Indigenous people who come up with stories like this that are not factual, I think are people who are suffering from trauma, and I think that needs to be addressed. And I think we're wrong to believe, because one archaeologist, based on stories circulating in the community there about dead children in an apple orchard, that person should be tested. But her archaeology report hasn't been seen by anyone because nobody is allowed to see it, and the police are not investigating. So it's a really surprising thing. If it were true, they wouldn't be going to this extent. People can't even fly zones over where these bodies are because the federal government has prevented that. So it's a very concerted effort to make sure that those sites, the 215 sites, which are all in a line, very much like the sewage trench that they really are never excavated.
Interesting. Almost like they're trying to hide the truth. I wanted to ask, what would you say to somebody, like, because I'm thinking it's so childish, this fairy tale version, as if history is a fairy tale as if everything's all good or everything's all bad. Like the history is there's a lot that's happened, and to say it was all good or all bad is just obviously a red flag for anybody who's serious. Especially a historian who knows that there's a lot of complexities to any situation. But what would you say to somebody who heard what you just said there now, Jim, and said, this is all just misinformation and disinformation, Jim. This is all just hate-filled rhetoric. It's all misinformation.
Well, the very first thing, so I put out a tweet a few days that had 1.3 million views. And it was with me wearing a shirt that said, "Where are the missing graves?" And I got a lot of death threats. And so the very first instance, I think we have a problem, Canadian society, across all sorts of issues in which we've lost the art of disagreement. And I think the most important thing to do is not to presume that one is right. And I'm open. If someone were to excavate tomorrow in Kamloops and find 215 child remains, then I would change my opinion or my view and say I was wrong. But we're not allowed to in Canada, as adults even, to entertain any discussion, and the school system in particular, in any discussion whatsoever about a lot of these issues is something that's the death knell for a teacher. So generally one avoids it. But to more specifically answer your question, what I would say to somebody is that it's my understanding, based on the research that I've done, that they haven't found any graves or missing children, and that residential schools at the time served an important role.
Okay. I do have a couple more questions, and then I think we're going to move on to hearing more people's testimonies. But I want to ask, were you political before this happened, and what is your sort of perception been of Canada since then? Has it radically changed your sort of perception of our institutions since you got dragged out of the classroom in 2021?
Absolutely. I've become more cynical. I would rather be teaching today than doing this interview. But my regulatory body wants to cancel me as a teacher for the rest of my life. So there is some hard feeling. If I could just go back, mention that my father was a Canadian of note. He won the Order of Canada and involved in the patriation of the Constitution and had a storied career. And he died recently. But I had a lot of conversations with him, as you can imagine, and about being a fired teacher and asking my father for support and for advice. And I never got very far with my father. My father absolutely loved Canada, and he was loved by Canadians from coast to coast. But I never got far with him because he would start to swear and get very upset. He didn't understand why people had to put the statue of Johnny MacDonald behind a box or would tear it apart. Why we had to get rid of Edgerton Ryerson, who gave free public schooling to all Ontario children. So there's something that's happened to Canada in recent years that no one, I think, ever anticipated, where we started to hate ourselves and we started to destroy all the things that unite us. So I think, yes, I become bitter and cynical in some ways, and I don't want to be that person, but I will be until I'm fully vindicated because I did nothing wrong as a teacher. But it's really interesting that my father, who's very much an establishment figure, and then many of his friends would have conversations with me, and they wouldn't last long because they'd be so upset with what's happening to Canada. And if you can't love your own country, and the people who built this country, the people like MacDonald who created a railway that extended from one coast to the other, or Simon Fraser in his canoe going, down the Fraser River, the Mackenzie walking up to the Arctic. If we can't take pride in the men and the women who built the country, like the Ursuline nuns and Jesuit priests, and in fact do the opposite and call them all sorts of names, including murderers in residential schools, then I don't like the Canada that I'm living in today.
That's a very powerful. I mean, I relate, but I can't even imagine the fact that your father is like a historical icon of sorts, and I find that very saddening and disheartening, of course, and also a bit relatable that he almost can't even put into words the disappointment and the feeling of being let down by this place, being let down by these institutions. So I guess I'm understanding that even trying to talk to him about this, it just kind of quickly devolved into just pure frustration and rage, I guess.
Yes, because he knows how good a country Canada is and was. And he's a personal friend of Jean Chrétien. And many people refer to Chrétien because he adopted an Indigenous child as being some sort of monster. Mm-hmm. And my father knew what Chrétien went through and his wife, Aline, in raising a boy from a background of trauma. And they weren't able to save him. Mm-hmm. And he became, as you know, someone with a very checkered life. But my gosh, to look at someone like that as participating in the 60s scoop, this evil white, politician taking a kid out of his culture. All Chrétien wanted to do and all Canadians wanted to do in the 60s and all missionaries wanted to do with kids before that was to help them. And anybody who says the opposite is a liar.
Very, very well said. A lot of people are or any sort of leftist who would come across this space, or any official politician or even a conservative might say, "Oh, we're all hateful bigots," and the regular catchphrases that they would say. And I really, in a certain sense, want to take the high road here with one last question. If Truth and Reconciliation Day was actually about reconciliation, what do you think it actually would look like? If there was some, or do you think this whole day, the premise of it is just absurd to begin with, and it's just about kind of further justifying the kind of resentment of Canadian European Christian history?
Yeah, to me, reconciliation wouldn't involve demonizing all non-Indigenous Canadians. I think it's just an absurdity that you want to put people into white hats and black hats. Mm-hmm. This Manichaean worldview, and again, demonize particularly some of the most beautiful people in our past who went to remote reserves and other places to much hardships to themselves to help communities that were struggling. And but where I fit into this puzzle right now is really not about reconciliation. I don't have much to offer. Where I have a lot to offer is with truth. And I don't think reconciliation can come from deceit. I think we have to be true about our past. And if all sorts of now up until 1971, you had 8 bands in Manitoba who were fighting the federal government to keep their residential school open. All these things are not talked about. All I'm asking right now is for Canadians to stop the woke game of, again, placing people into categories of good and bad. History is nuanced. Human character is nuanced. And truth presents all Canadians today and in the past as people who are part of a very good society, and we should stop seeing ourselves as anything but that.
Absolutely. So, Jim, I really appreciate your time. I did want to ask you one more question, which is, you talked about your regulatory body wanting to make sure that you never teach or never work again. Is there anything hopeful that you want to share in terms of solutions you're looking at or participating in to try and turn this country around?
Yeah, I could say all sorts of things, but I'll limit myself to one thing. That I, on Twitter, where I hear from a lot of people, and I would love people to communicate with me through direct message at Jim McMurtry 01. But I've been lately hearing from a lot of high school students who don't know me and I don't know them, but they've taken the time to write to me and thanking me. And the one thing that they say, and I think this, to answer your question, this is why I believe, and I'm an optimistic person to begin with, I think it all bodes well, as I think young people are wanting and insisting on having open inquiry and discussion. And I think so. We started off today speaking to a wonderful young Canadian named Harrison Faulkner, and he was talking about being in trouble, what was Spotify and so forth, and the debate being closed, and Leah Gazin wanting to put people like him and me in jail or fine us. What's most exciting for me is that young people have had enough of this. Many, many young people across Canada, and they're reaching out and they're saying, "Thank you. We don't want the Canada that's being presented to us by our teachers, by our professors. We want a Canada where people can talk about these things and come to some kind of consensus." Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Jim, sharing your testimony. I truly want to learn more about your father and how he got the Order of Canada. That sounds very interesting. Rachel, I want to get to your story in just a second, but I know that the ferryman's toll is in here, and he's someone who's very passionate about European history and how it relates to our heritage and that sort of thing. I know he can get very spicy with his perspective, but I'm very curious to hear what he thinks about this and Truth and Reconciliation Day. So the ferryman, if you are around, unmute yourself and kind of share your thoughts on this sort of residential school denialism versus free speech sort of battle going on right now in this country. Are you there, buddy?
Yeah. Thanks, Greg. That was Well, it was really good to hear Jim's whole story. I'd heard of this case, but I hadn't heard those details. And yeah, it's just another system attack on somebody who actually wants to get to the truth and, move forward as opposed to just ruminate over nonsense endlessly. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me that they've treated him the way they did. Look, I have a much more aggressive take on this whole story than most people are probably comfortable with. Obviously, I come from a very pro-European perspective on things. I think that Europeans built this country. Europeans are the reason why Canada is a great place to live. And I think they've systematically attacked us over the past, decades, really, because they understand that a strong European population is something that stands in the way of globalism. And I see the residential school denialism nonsense as just being another way to bludgeon old stock Canadians into giving up their heritage, their history, their homeland, and their birthright. This country belongs to us. It was made by us, for our descendants, by our ancestors. Anybody who tries to undermine that is somebody who comes from a place of hatred. And that's what this residential school denialism is. It is a bludgeon used against white people. That's what it really amounts to. And so when I hear people try to come at this in good faith, and I feel like that's where Jim is coming from. He's somebody who genuinely comes at this from a good faith perspective. He wants reconciliation, but the truth is they do not want reconciliation. That is not what this is about. This isn't actually getting to the truth. It's not actually about having some kind of amicable agreement from which we can move forward from and let bygones be bygones. That's not the intention behind this rhetoric and this attack on European Canadians. Now, I think that this speaks to something much deeper that's a problem specifically with Europeans in the modern era. Our altruism has become suicidal. And funny enough, I think the residential schools were a mistake, personally. Not because they were evil, not because they were a systematic genocide against the population, not because they were horrible and the Catholic Church is evil and all of these things. It has nothing to do with that. I think it was a mistake because it's a testament or a perfect example of how liberalism is a horrible path that Europeans have gone down. I think it was a mistake to ever try and integrate these people into our society. I think that the correct course of action was to let them go off on their own course and be their own people. I think that this altruism that Europeans go through, and it doesn't matter which example you choose, whether it's, as Jim brought up, the George Floyd and the black situation in America, or the Aboriginals of Australia, or ex-colonial countries, any of these things, this liberal mentality of trying to integrate and, adopt and assimilate these people into your society was always a mistake. I think we need to reconcile this fact that this whole notion that we're all going to get along and that we should have ever tried to get along with these people on this level in our societies is a mistake, and it always was. And if you don't believe me, the argument that I would make here is that the people who put together these residential schools, the intention behind them was noble, honorable, and well-intentioned. They wanted what was best. They were trying to do what was right. They were trying to be humanitarian, and look at how it has been used against us. And in 20 years, the same people who are demanding that we do X, Y, and Z for the Indigenous populations of Canada now are going to take those same things that we did and say, look at what you've done to us. This whole notion that, what they're trying to do now is somehow better than what they did before. Like, I don't think you understand. It's not about actually fixing the problem. They're not trying to fix the problem. They're trying to destroy you. So when we look back on this, everything that we're doing in the current time period, the same mentality will apply to in the future as applies today to residential schools. They will look back on the negotiations and everything that we did in this time period and say it wasn't enough. And it was evil what you did. And you shouldn't have done that. And you should have given us this. And you shouldn't have done that. Like, it'll just be endless. Because what you have to understand about these people is, again, it's not about actually coming to an amicable result. It's about deconstructing every aspect of you and your identity. That's ultimately what they are trying to do with stuff like this. It's not something that's meant to be productive. It's something that's meant to be an attack. And the more you allow these attacks to continue, the worse they will get. So in my perspective, I'm not interested in reconciliation anymore. And I don't think a lot of Canadians are. I think we saw a lot of this over the past week with what was going on with National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. I don't want your reconciliation anymore. I don't want anything to do with you people. I don't want you to integrate in my society. I don't want to live with you. I don't want to be friends with you. I don't want, to have some kind of amicable agreement, because you've shown that you're a bad faith actor, that you have no interest in actually coming to an amicable agreement. You just want to bludgeon me until there's nowhere left for me to go. And my children and their descendants are a hated minority in the country that my ancestors built. So why would I have a good faith discussion? Why would I want anything to do with you? You're a hostile enemy. That is who these people are. And what they are trying to do to you is every accusation is a confession. When they accuse your ancestors of genocide, it's quite simple. That is what they are actively doing to you now. They are committing a genocide against the European populations across the entire world. As Maxime Bernier rightly stated today, it's not a great replacement theory anymore. It's a great replacement reality. And it's time for us to come to the reality that they are not interested in having a good faith discussion. They're trying to fucking destroy you. So pardon my language. I'll end there. Food for thought. Again, I'm not interested in a liberal, solution to this problem anymore. I'm interested in separation. That's the position I come from. I don't want anything to do with these people anymore. And I don't think any European person should want anything to do with these people anymore. I want them out of my country. And I want, in the case of, let's say, the Indigenous, I want them on their reserves, separate from us. They can do their own thing. I don't want anything to do with them.
I appreciate what you're saying there, Freeman.
All right. I really liked your, it's if you guys have heard of the horseshoe theory, it's the idea that the far left and the far right agree. In this case, it's like the far left thought residential schools shouldn't have happened. And Ferryman's like, residential schools shouldn't have happened for a different reason. But yeah, no, I appreciate that. And
but this is a perfect example, Greg. Sorry to jump in there, but that's a perfect example, because if the residential school system never happened, right now, what the left would be saying is, look at how you didn't do anything for those poor Indigenous children who were being abused. Look at how you left us to die and starve and be exposed to the elements. Look at how you left us to be, victimized by disease and the elements. Look at how you didn't help us at all. Look,
so you're
how
right when you say it will never be enough, just like with the LGBTQ. There's never going to be enough. There will always be something else that we need to reconcile with, to bow down to, and you were talking about the being a minority. I mean, mass immigration is already threatening us with being a minority. So there's really a lot to that, where we're having to kowtow to these people to just, be apologists for being white in so many ways that we're going to be, pretty much wiped out of our country.
Yeah. While you're on the horn here, the Ferryman, this is kind of a topic that I've thought about a lot. Because I tried to gently bring this up, this idea that, hey, Truth and Reconciliation Day is, there's a really anti-white flavor to it, and I appreciate you coming on because you kind of gave that take on steroids. But when it comes to the average European descendant man in Canada who's demoralized, or who is maybe giving in to the fear of, well, I don't want to be a residential school denier, or bad things, and they get caught up in the propaganda or the narrative. are some people just not even like too far gone to be saved? Or, what do you think sort of the solution is there to wake up more Canadians to be like, hey, your history matters, your history means something, and if you don't stand up and try to honor it, then the sort of history as you know it is kind of just gonna, your way of life and your people will like cease to exist. Do you have any sort of thoughts on that and how to solve this sort of this deep, aggressive demoralization problem of the average white Canadian? It's a big question, I know.
Yeah, I'm trying to just quickly, digest that. Look, I think that on a long enough timeline, I don't know if necessarily you can remoralize the demoralized in any specific way, but the reality is that at some point on a long enough timeline, every European Canadian is going to have to face this reality basically it's not a question of when they come to the realization that this is what's being done to them. It's a question of whether or not there's enough time left to remedy it after it does. The collision course that we are headed on looks something like South Africa. That's the situation that they're putting us in. And this is true for all European countries and European colonial countries. Mm-hmm. If you don't believe that they're like, it's the small things. They're obviously doing it to us, but like a really good example of this is, English universities are now removing terms like Anglo-Saxon. Now, you may think like, well, does that really matter? And it's like, yes, because these are the same people that will tell you, well, white is not an ethnic group. What you're referring to is a collection of European ethnic groups that, make up the larger European, racial makeup, right? So you have English and German and blah, blah, blah. And then if you say, okay, well, I'm English, they'll tell you, well, English is actually a collection of, Celto-Germanic peoples. There's no real such thing as English, because there's Normans and Anglo-Saxons and Celts and Gaels and Picts and Scots. They break it down. And so now they're at the point where they're saying, well, there's not really such a thing as Anglo-Saxon. Anglo-Saxon is kind of a reference to, a collection of Germanic tribes that migrated to England in the mid first millennia over hundreds of years. And, it was made up of Jutes and Frisians and Angles and Saxons. And so like, using this blanket term of Anglo-Saxon, do you see the course that they've put us on? Everything is about atomizing you and turning you into an individual that has no collective identity, no sense of where you came from and who you are, with the specific intent of turning you into this individual that can be pushed around by other groups. Notice how as they deconstruct your collective identity, if you are of European heritage, as they actively deconstruct and delegitimize your identity, they are simultaneously bolstering and reinforcing the identities of everybody who is attacking you. So in this case, the indigenous, right? The same argument that I just made would apply to the indigenous peoples. The notion that the indigenous are some sort of collective identity is nonsense, except for in the context of, the European peoples who came and kind of saw these similar things. But the idea that, they're one people with one interest is nonsense. Obviously, they were warring for a long time. They didn't view themselves as the same. So like, do you see what I'm saying? Like they're actively bolstering up this idea that the indigenous are this collective identity that is in opposition to us as they're deconstructing ours. And the same thing is true for blacks in America. And the same thing is true. This is why the best way to summarize this is the term BIPOC. Why do you think they use the term black indigenous people of color? Isn't that interesting? It includes everybody except whitey, doesn't it? Why do you think that they're doing that? Why do you think that they bolster up all of these other groups' collective identities as they delegitimize and minimize yours? Do you think that's an accident? Do you think that, this is the kind of thing that leads towards genocidal behavior? And the irony being that they're the ones accusing you of having genocidal intent simply for standing up and defending your own identity. So, Yeah, to get back to your question, the answer is, look, people are going to figure this out one way or another, and it'll either come because they're paying attention and they see what's being done to them, or they start listening to the right people and they realize the trajectory that we're headed on, or it's going to be whenever they have a knock at their door because some gang, like, if you want to use the South African context, because a gang of Bantus is trying to break through your gates so they can rape your wife, pour boiling water down your children's throats as they make you watch before they slit your throat and let you bleed out on the floor, watching your children die. And if that sounds graphic, and I know it is, I don't care, because that's what's being done to them. That their story is our future if we do not address this situation and start coming from this from a place of strength. Unless we address this and realize that we are actually being attacked, and this is the kind of thing they are setting us up for, we are in big trouble. And this residential school denialism is just another link in the chain of them, binding our hands. So it is incredibly important that we fight this. It's incredibly important that we understand the ramifications of why they are doing this to us, of what the real symbolism behind this is, and that we start understanding what the real problem is. And it's that unless we collectivize and understand that we are a real people and assert ourselves and our history and our heritage and, claim our birthright in this world, and, don't let them, tell you otherwise, this nation is your birthright. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Unless we start doing these things, they will disenfranchise us, turn us into a hated minority, flood us with the third world until your children and their descendants are left with nothing, and they are simply a hated minority in what should have been their inheritance. So with that, I'll leave it.
Thank you very much. Before you go, I did kind of want to quickly ask, sort of through the lens of free speech and also what's happening in the UK right now. Like, I know that you follow European politics really closely through this lens. And what is there an equivalent happening in the UK of Truth and Reconciliation Day? If I'm not mistaken, they tell crazy stories like, oh, no. Yeah, the history of the UK is black people and Moroccans. What is the equivalent in the UK to Truth and Reconciliation Day?
I don't know if there necessarily is something that translates perfectly in that regard, but they do. So, for example, right now in the UK, it's their Black History Month, and so they make this big song and dance of the Windrush generation, right? Which is this huge influx of Caribbean, English colonial carabiners. I don't know is that the right term? But that came to the UK in the late 50s and 60s, I think. And so they make it out like, this is a very crucial part of English history. Like, they made England, England owes everything it has to this Windrush generation. Like, the same thing they do here, right? So like there's that aspect of it. But really what it comes down to in the English context is basically it's just constantly bludgeoning them for their colonial past, which again is, as I said earlier, is a testament to how liberalism is kind of a suicidal altruism. Like, this liberal approach to dealing with these populations never benefits us in the long run. England as an empire, the British Empire, was one of the most benevolent and civilizing forces the world has ever seen. It was unlike any other empire that ever existed. The way they went about managing and incorporating these foreign peoples into their empire was a benefit to them. For every negative thing that happened, 100 good things happened to these people. And they make it out like the British Empire was, I don't know, the empire from Star Wars or something, like some like genocidal force of evil, like, like a cartoonish depiction, a caricature of, megalomaniacal villainy. It's not at all what it was. And if you don't believe me, go look at the videos, because they exist, of, say, Jamaica in the 50s, or Nigeria, or South Africa. Go look at what these civilizations look like under British rule, and tell me that it's better now. I think if you would say that to me, you're just a liar. But the other thing that I would add to this too is that one of the things that came up there is, as you mentioned, this residential school denialism is a bill. What is it again? Is it 413 or something?
Yeah, 413. Yeah, 413. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, this bill is virtually identical to the Holocaust denial bill, and I just want to, point this out to anybody who may be listening in the audience who is a CPC supporter. That bill, the Holocaust denial bill, that was introduced by the conservatives. Your free speech, this party that claims itself to be the champion of free speech, yeah, they're the ones that introduced this measure, and they're the ones who crafted the legislation that now is being used to introduce the Holocaust denialism bill. So if you believe that the conservatives are going to vote against this bill, I think you're out of your mind. I think you will have unanimous consent from the conservatives in supporting this bill. And if you think I'm off the mark, why do you think Pierre and all of his colleagues were running around on Truth and Reconciliation Day, doing everything they could to appease them? If you think that for a second that the conservatives are going to stop this bill, I think you're delusional. They're the ones who introduced this legislation to begin with. They're the reason we are at where we're at. So don't kid yourself. The conservatives are not your ally in this fight, for free speech. They only want free speech that's convenient to them. That's it. They don't actually care about the real, unadulterated, unfettered free speech. They want, free speech so that I can, go after Justin Trudeau's carbon tax or fly a fuck Trudeau flag. That's kind of free speech the conservatives care about, not really important speech. So with that, I'll
Can I just interrupt for 2 seconds? I just want to tell the room I'm getting a few messages and why they're not being able to speak right now. We were just going to cover a few people and then we're going to open up the room. So I just want people to be patient. We're going to let everybody speak.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you, Ferryman. Bro was cooking. Yeah, I actually covered that the other night on my stream. And you're absolutely right. They actually initially presented Holocaust denialism in 2022. It didn't pass, but then they slipped it in. Believe it or not, right around the convoy is when I think it's around the convoy. Maybe it was a bit after that.
No, it was early. It was early 2023.
Early 2023, right? And I thought that was so interesting coming from the conservatives because it's like, oh, are you worried about high taxes, Trudeau? Well, that's why we need to talk about the Holocaust and make Holocaust denial illegal. Very interesting. Yep.
I would add one more thing here as well, which is, this will be controversial, and a lot of people may not like that I say this, but that's the beauty of free speech. You don't have to like what I say. I just have the right to say it. And that's, I don't think it's a coincidence that the member of parliament who introduced this bill is half Jewish. I think it's a testament. I think, this is something, look, whether I don't really care what your opinions are on the Holocaust.
Isn't she indigenous?
She's a quarter Lakota, a quarter Chinese, and half Jewish.
I'm sure it's a coincidence. I'm sure it's just a coincidence.
I just want to point out that regardless of how you feel about the Holocaust, which we're not allowed to really have a discussion about anyways in this country because you can go to jail for 2 years if you even flirt with the idea that maybe something is not exactly how they told you. But regardless, that's not necessarily what's important. What is important is that if you're honest, and objective, you will understand that the Holocaust denial grift is the biggest grift that has ever existed. It has been used to drain resources out of Germany, the United States, other Eastern European countries for 60 years. They have been milking that genocide. It is used to finance groups like the ADL. It is used to finance groups like the SPLC. It is used to finance groups like the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. It is a massive political grift. I don't care it doesn't matter if you believe it or not. The point I'm getting at here is that the reason I don't think it's a coincidence is because I think that, there are people within this camp pushing for this legislation that can see how effective having that kind of legislation has been in terms of getting financing and resources for Jewish groups. And I think they're looking at this and saying, and, they're rubbing their hands and saying, look, if we can get this bill passed, we can go after all of our political enemies. We can, basically shut down anybody who says something. And on top of that, we can use it to leverage governments, probably not only in Canada, but across the world, to give us money, to give us resources, to give us whatever we want. So, I think this is as much as, again, I know that's controversial, and I know that a lot of people may not like hearing that, but I think it's important context to this whole situation. Understanding that they have used that as a way of, pressuring governments and corporations and academic institutions and all of these places into giving them money is incredibly important. And that's ultimately what this is going to achieve.
I would definitely be interested to see sort of the, if there's kind of very easy to look at numbers of like, hey, look how much money was made off of this denialism grift. But no, that's a really great parallel to bring up. And I would argue that you said they're obviously going to use it against their political enemies. I think Bill C-63 is like the biggest set of weapons, for tyrants to weaponize against people. And then, of course, there's just so many vectors of attack right now. And C-413 on residential school denialism is obviously just another one that is just another vector of attack. And No, and for anyone listening who's like, oh, Ferryman seems really out there, every single other group in the BIPOC is, when you advocate for yourself and your birthright, there's a conflict going on in Israel and the Middle East right now. And you will hear a lot of Jewish people talking about their birthright and their land. And whenever any other group talks about this, it's absolutely celebrated. It's the media is glowing about it. It's something that's totally acceptable, but because of the propaganda, because of the situation we're in 2024, and because it hasn't been resisted in a significant way for decades since I've ever been alive, probably, there's just all this groundwork that's been laid to really make European people hate themselves and their history. And it's definitely a huge part of the formula, a huge part of the equation here in terms of what we're up against in Canada. And Ferryman was really cooking here when he brought up the fact that this Conservative Party is not going to be our saviors here. At the very least, it's going to be people further right than the Conservative Party to apply pressure to try and make them at least do the right thing or something. But I really don't think the solution has presented itself in Canada yet.
Has a single Conservative member of Parliament even said, like, this is outrageous? Have they even talked about it? Have they even brought it up as something that is out of the question?
So Harry Faulkner was on earlier, and he said that, like, no sitting conservative, no establishment conservative has said anything about this. All they've really done is worn the orange shirts. There's someone who I invited on the space, Chanel. She really follows the gender ideology in schools. And there was a conservative MP, I'm going to mess this up, I think it's Manitoba, but there's a conservative, not MP, I think provincial or city conservative person. And they said, hey, there's a parallel here between, parental rights being taken away with gender ideology and like the horrible things that happened during the residential school. And even a conservative saying that, they got disavowed by the party. Like, you're not allowed to make this comparison. So to answer your question, Ferry, absolutely not. They're not resisting this at all. We all saw Pierre Poilievre wearing the orange sweater. It reads exactly like a Justin Trudeau tweet, folks. Exactly like a Justin Trudeau tweet. And I would certainly argue that this touches upon one of the most important issues going on right now, which is, traditionally, Canada is a European nation. It's known as that. And right now, we are it's totally acceptable to hate us as a group. We talk about stopping hate. And it's like, well, you're allowed to hate white people. Like and I made, I made a kind of a video about this, proving this, of how, tearing down statues, running down churches, like this, again, hardly gets much attention at all. And I really feel like we're just kind of getting breadcrumbs with the bill. We got this recent bill from the Conservatives, like, hey, we're going to stop churches burning down. We're going to condemn that. And it's like, what does this really do, though? Like, they're not even opposing the premise of, the residential school denialism. And I don't know if you were here for this either, Ferry, but because I forgot about this or didn't know this, but earlier in the Parliament buildings back in 2021, after this whole Kamloops mass graves things came out for the residential schools equal genocide, they passed a motion in the Parliament buildings to say, we all solemnly swear and agree that residential schools equals genocide. Our history equals genocide. So there's already sort of a precedent set in the House of Commons that all the Conservatives voted yes to, that, our history is inherently genocidal. So needless to say, especially when it comes to this issue, we are down in the ninth inning. We are definitely in a pickle here, because this Conservative Party who's supposed to champion us is really asleep at the wheel. I think they're controlled opposition. But thanks again for hopping on, Ferryman. Really appreciate your perspective. We're here. We're all about the free speech. Maybe really quick before you go, do you think we can stop at Bill C-63? Come on, give us a white pill before you go, sir.
Do I think that we can stop Bill C-63?
Yeah, like our initiatives at
Save
Free Speech. Yeah. Yeah, our initiatives at SaveFreeSpeech.ca is to apply pressure to the political bubble in Ottawa. Yeah. Outside pressure, try to convince a senator, try to get our videos shared with, Elon Musk or whomever.
Look, I'm of the opinion that it would be, I guess, good if it was stopped. I actually think it will be better for us if it passes.
You're an accelerationist. I knew it.
I know you can call me that if you want. I'm of the opinion that Canadians need to be pressured into a situation where they have to act and not hope, for the government, Big Daddy to come in and save you. So,
people have to lose all hope first before anything gets better.
Here's a better way to put it. If you manage to put pressure on the government and get them to stop it, it'll be a conservative victory, and the Conservatives will take that and they will, laud it over you and say, look at how good we did, by finally deciding that we were going to stand up to a bill that we should have been standing up to a lot harder anyways. I'm of the opinion that Canadians need to stop relying on the political apparatus to solve their problems and start taking action themselves and organizing themselves at the grassroots level outside of the political system. So, that's my perspective on it. The truth is, I don't really care at this point what the government does. I don't really care what laws they pass. I'm tired of them and their bullshit. So yeah, like I'm one of these people that are like, keep going. Like every time they do this stuff, every time they get more egregious with these bills that they pass, it just radicalizes more Canadians and makes them see that, that this is a pointless endeavor and that we need to take action ourselves. So, it's good for me. It's good for me and the circles that I operate in. Like I benefit from them doing this stuff. It brings more recruits to us. So let them keep doing it is what I say.
Aren't you concerned that if this bill passes, you'll be like one of the first people that they go after?
Oh, for sure. There's a good chance they look. I don't know if you want to get into a whole thing on this, but like I understand that. I'm perfectly happy to go to jail if I have to, especially if it's for speech. Whatever. It is what it is. That being said, look, there is a diminishing returns that they're getting on these kinds of actions. So, the best example, I think most people in here are probably familiar with it, but if you're not, there's a man from the United Kingdom. His name is Sam Melia. He's a father of two, a patriot, a guy who has stood up for his people. And he was arrested and imprisoned for giving out stickers, not even putting the stickers up, for giving out stickers. And on these stickers, it said things like, love your nation, or mass immigration is replacement, or, I'm trying to think of them, but, stop.
It's okay to be white was
yeah,
one, right?
Stop Muslim rape gangs, stuff like this, which is all perfectly valid things. And they threw him in jail. And yeah, they he had to spend 2 years in prison, but that became a massive political victory for us, or at least a propaganda victory for us, because we took this guy's situation and blew it up into a story that was getting retweeted by people like Elon Musk. So the reason I say that there's a diminishing returns on these kinds of actions from them is that the more people they lock up for even lesser and lesser crimes, the more it delegitimizes their regime. So if they want to put me in jail because I said, the whole residential school mass graves is bullshit, bring it on. I'll do 2 years. That's no big deal to me. I'm okay with it. And, then it's on you guys, to take that and turn it into this massive political firestorm. Right. This is how we have to operate now. So that's how I see it.
I'm gonna be right next to you in the jail cell, but really appreciate you taking the time. Ferryman's Toll. Rachel, let's go to you. Let's hear your story of being canceled. But actually, before though, real quick, Jim, I see you're hanging out still in the here. I'm curious if you wanted to make any comments on what the ferryman was talking about. If you're still tuned in and listening.
Well, I'm finding this absolutely fascinating, and what I'm really looking forward to is hearing from some of your guests and hearing their reaction to what I said, in addition to what others are saying. So I'm happy to be a listener, but thank you anyway.
All right. Thank you, Jim. All right. Let's go to you, Rachel. You made a tweet. I think it was on Truth and Reconciliation Day on Monday. And,
and so go ahead.
I was going to say, I'll try to get the tweet in here so people can look at it. But is the tweet up? Do you have a picture of the tweet?
You know what? I'm afraid. Okay, so that's where I had to take it down because I was.
Can I just retweet it now?
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
Tweet out the
please.
photo. I'll just tweet out the photo of it. But yeah, you face these consequences, I guess, for tweeting, I guess, in opposition.
So that's where I'm coming from, this aggressive assault on freedom of speech, right? And it's not the first time I've been canceled, and I am in an industry where it's rather, extremely liberal, being an actor in Vancouver. And I am in alignment with both Jim and Ferryman. I empathize with what Jim went through, and maybe he has more hope for truth and reconciliation, but I'm more aligned with Ferryman, where I don't believe in any truth. There's any truth to be told, or has been being told, or reconciliation is possible, whatever that means. And if someone like myself, who's not inciting violence, which they're considering denialism is violence, it's calculated, it's harmful, it's hate, which I don't believe I'm doing by sharing my views, but you get people who, like woke activists, who can file human rights complaints. That's what this bill is going to allow them to do, for simply disagreeing with us. Like the ones who called my agent. So Monday, my agent was infiltrated with messages and emails telling them, that I shouldn't be on their roster. I'm racist. We do work with a lot of First Nations or Indigenous Native Canadians. So that's not where I was coming from. I was just, for one, hashtag where are the bodies? Okay. Two, I don't feel that I have anything to reconcile for. And for these people, it costs them nothing to file a complaint. And if this bill passes, it'll be people like me who will have this process hanging over their heads for years with costly legal bills, or I just pay, $50,000 to the government and $20,000 to a person who's deeply offended. And this allows for anonymous people to complain. You can never confront your accusers. You can never ask questions. So if this bill was passed through right now, I would have been charged with hate crime. And it's absolutely insane to be dealing with this in Canada. And you're right, like the Conservatives won't do anything about this. We already know, I think the majority of people know, we're dealing with the Uniparty, then there's the PPC. So I hope we get some dissenting voices here. We're not just going to be in an echo chamber here. I want to hear other people's views from the other side. But this is very dangerous.
Guys, thanks so much for the 5 gifted subscriptions to Fuck You Make Me. Thank you so much.
After not being jabbed, for speaking my views against CBC, and now to share, and have to take it down. I felt sick that I had to take down my post because I stand by it. And even being on, suggesting we host a space because we were, trying to figure out who was doing some doxing on Twitter. I want to speak to those people who feel the need to cancel people for speaking their views. I really want to engage in cordial civil conversation with these people who feel like it's just to not allow us to speak. And that's, that's right in the face of this denialism bill.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Rachel. And what she's referring to there is, I saw this tweet on Twitter and I clicked on it and it was like deleted already. So I screenshotted it, and it was from this woman named Jennifer. And, I don't want to say too much because she's not here to defend herself. Although what I'm about to say is not speaking behind her back, because I was DMing her on Twitter and this is essentially what I had to say. Well, I'll start with the initial tweet that I tweeted out there. She said, there's these 4 anonymous people, these so-called anonymous people, who are spewing insane residential school denialism. I've looked some of them up and I know where one of them works, and they work at like a big company or something. I looked them up on LinkedIn. And I saw that and I'm like, and I tweeted out saying like, oh, this is really alarming. This person's obviously alluding to doxing. Like, hey, I have the information of where you work and you're an insane residential school denialist. And I said, Bill C-63 would be a dream come true for people like this, because, this person was showing a willingness to sleuth around on the internet and have persons show consequences for their political opinion, which goes against the official narrative, right? And there was kind of some back and forth, and what she was doing, unfortunately, is she started to muddy the waters. So she was saying, look at these death threats I got. Look at these death threats I got. Look at these people bothering me. You endorse this? Is this free speech? And it's like, hold on. There's a difference between criminal behavior, death threats, and saying something about residential schools that oppose it. Like, obviously there's a difference between these two things. And I said that in the DMs. I'm like, I think you're kind of muddying the waters here. And as a free speech advocate, like, this really is upsetting. And, you're someone who seems to be well connected. You're part of an advisor group or one of these like political sort of
advocates.
Yeah. And she wants to advocate for reconciliation. And it's like, well, let's talk about this. Like, and to this day, I mean, it hasn't been that long, but like, I'm confused whether or not she, thinks people on this call deserve how they were treated for simply, saying a few things about history, which doesn't prescribe to this oversimplified narrative that residential schools equals genocide.
Exactly. And just to let the room know, we have invited this woman a few times to join our space. She's refused. So we're trying to make this fair and give her a voice.
Yeah. And it would have been nice to have a back and forth. And, earlier before the space, she said a few more things where, like, someone made a comment of like, hey, where are their bodies or something like this. And she's like, this is exactly why I'm not coming on this space. And it's like, well, again, this is really disingenuous. You're going to take one random internet comment and say, that's why we're not going to have a conversation about it. And also that comment is the same thing as a death threat. Like, it's all very feels, it's unfortunate because I feel like it's really muddying the waters.
Well, again,
yep.
This is what I was going off on whenever I had my monologue there, which is you guys, like, I almost think it's funny. There's a lot of irony here, which is you guys are still coming at this discussion from a good faith perspective. You guys want to have, you actually want to have a real conversation about this and find some kind of, agreed upon, truth and understanding of reality. They are not interested in that. They don't give a shit. Like this is crucial. This is just applies to the left indefinitely about all topics. They're not interested.
You're absolutely right. I don't think we were trying to come to some sort of agreement, but just to let her speak. It's not about. I'm not trying to be kumbaya with these people, but I'm just saying I wanted to hear, and maybe other people like her could speak to this and just give us their side. Doesn't mean we all have to.
But again, they're not going to do that because you would obviously destroy them. You would make them look foolish. They don't have any facts to back up their arguments. So exactly, like even. Like the idea that you're going to have a discussion with these people is just not like they avoid it at every turn. I don't know if anybody saw this video that was going around of Karima, who went up to and kind of like approached a Canadian anti-hate board network. Canadian anti-hate. Yeah, a board member from the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. And he just like would not address anything. And then whenever she, in good faith, tried to engage him, he said that she was threatening him, and that her videographer.
That's just a form of gaslighting.
Exactly, but that's what I mean. Is that's the only thing you're ever going to get from these people. So like the idea that you're going to have a discussion with them is nonsense. Everything they do
we tried.
It's always obfuscation, manipulation, trickery, deceit. Like this is the world that they operate in. So there's no point in really even trying to engage them other than to show people how they are liars. And so they're never going to willingly do that because they know that they will be, exposed for what they are.
I can appreciate that perspective, and to some degree, I think a lot of people are like that, especially official leftists. For this person in question, she claims to be a conservative, I guess, but I also come from the the whole phrase, force a tyrant to act like one. I think there is merit to sort of letting people sort of show who they are through their own actions, as opposed to being the aggressor. It's like, let me actually just continue to give you the good faith and kind of let them bury themselves through their actions. And the reason I do that is because, I'm taking a more moderate approach to solving the problems in this country. And I think part of that is to try and reach and wake up the normies and kind of collectivize around something we can all agree on. And I don't disagree. There's going to be people who, these people hate us. These people want to, and that's very true. I won't go into detail because I think it was in the DMs, but it was like, oh yeah, sure. Like, I'm not calling you colonizer, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, well, the people on TV are, and they have a lot of sway. They have a lot of influence. They're tearing down statues. If you haven't noticed, if I'm not mistaken, there was actually like a horrific sort of, you could call it a hate crime, against, I don't know the details. It just kind of came across my feed, but like there was a horrific like beatdown of a white person or something recently in Canada. Again, is that getting?
Oh, this was in Kelowna, where a young girl, a group of 13-year-olds, beat the living shit out of a white girl.
Well,
who were the perpetrators? Other 13-year-olds, white girls?
Yeah, Indians.
It's hard to tell. You can't really tell because how whenever you use a camera at night, the exposure kind of makes everything look a lot lighter than it is.
Right.
It's very difficult to tell what the ethnicity of the attackers was and who it was. And we're not going to know, at least in any official capacity, because they're use. And so their identities are protected.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah. Thanks for chiming in there, Ferry. Rachel, is there anything else you wanted to add about your story?
No, just being a free speech absolutist and what is hate, that's such subjective. It's like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. So I'm just very passionate about that. And I'm kind of at a crossroads with my own journey with my career and also being a PPC member and activist. And they're not jiving. The two are not jiving. So I'm just at a crossroads personally with that, but I wanted to know if you want to open up the room and then we'll go to hands.
Yeah, we could totally do that. I will give one last sort of spiel on this individual, Jennifer, as well, because it really speaks to the sort of cultural undertone of the mission at SaveFreeSpeech.ca. If for those who don't know, I've started an initiative, SaveFreeSpeech.ca. You can check out the website. We give a very vivid and horrific summary of Bill C-63, which is a legislation that would be the end of free speech in Canada. It would be like a tyranny toolkit for the tyrants in this country to go after political opponents, people they don't like. So yeah, definitely check that out. We're also funding a documentary that has to do with the Canadian Anti-Hate Network and the far left ideologues in this country and exposing it. We're working with an award-winning documentarian. So you can check that out at our website. Just click the donate button. The cultural undertone, what really bothered me about sort of the tone, I guess, or the energy of this woman, Jennifer, is that it really feels, and because she said in the DMs, we actually have a lot in common. And I was thinking about it, and it's like, well, on a very important fundamental issue, we're kind of opposites. She's, I don't know if she's ever worked in HR, but she has this very sort of like political correctness is like, we must obey the supremacy of political correctness. I'm not putting words in her mouth. I'm just kind of like, that's the impression I get from a lot of what she's talking about and a lot of like what she values. And, Yeah, and like I am the opposite of that. I think that this supremacy of political correctness is precisely the problem that is, the boot on the face of so many Canadians, and especially, white Canadians who believe all of the sort of propaganda of that, our history is inherently genocidal, and you're privileged, and all of this. The supremacy of political correctness is totally the problem, and part of the cultural undertone of what we're doing at Save Free Speech is totally rejecting that. People are so serious about, oh, I better not say something that gets me in trouble. And to be fair, it's unfortunately when you're in certain, job positions, there are these sort of, as you were saying, Rachel, with your story, there are these kind of ruthless expectations of like, hey, if you disobey the official narrative, like you will be, fired. And the fact, though, that it's infecting people's daily lives and social lives, as if like as if we're all Canadian citizens who have the same HR department, and that we all need to make sure that our opinions are hunky dory. Like I totally reject that. And I think
said. That's perfectly said. And that's why I say personally I'm at a crossroads, because I am an activist. I am political. I do have a passion for the truth, for freedom of speech. And it doesn't jive well with what I do. If I need to keep my, I've had it happen where I've been counseled before and I had to keep my mouth shut, and I'm not one to keep my mouth shut anymore. And I don't want to be. I need to contribute, right? So if I have a voice, I want to use it.
Absolutely. Speaking of which, we have a tenured and esteemed activist who I just brought into the space here, Mr. Mark Emery, the Prince of Pot. He's someone who has, he's a very long time political activist advocating for the legalization of marijuana. And more recently, Mark, I've noticed that you have been kind of pointing out this, like, hey, people seem to be bullying Whitey, and it seems to be very popular in Canada. And I saw you reading the Grave Error. You posted a picture of you reading the Grave Error book. Maybe if you wanted to hop on here for a second, maybe, introduce yourself and talk about that book, maybe first and foremost, and kind of then continue on with whatever you'd like to talk about with this topic of residential school denialism. I think you're unmuted now.
That was a very empowering book. Grave Error. And I really felt confident speaking afterwards, having read it and then digested what it had to say, that there are no credible evidence or data or proof or anything ascribing malintent by any particular nun or teacher or residential school headmaster, headmistress. It's just not there. Not only are the bodies not there, but there's no evil intent to be proven. There's nobody who can say it. And there's so much good in the history of the residential school system that can be proven. Photographs, for many, many books written by Native Canadians who went through the residential school system, who said great things. In fact, there are very few books about the residential school system, considering we taught them all to speak English and write English, and that's why they can to this day do that, is because the European taught them, is that there's not a lot of historical data to impugn the system, and there's a ton of stuff out there to validate that the residential school system is extremely beneficial and useful for the vast majority of Native children. Now, of course, these are awful times. I went to school in the early 60s, mid 60s. They still beat us in those days. They still took a leather belt out and whacked our hand until we cried for half an hour. And that's in the 1960s. In the 1920s, these were rough schools everywhere for every kind of Canadian. It was not an easy life. We were mostly pioneer children at the time. Whites didn't live that much different on the prairies, especially in the 20s and 30s, than any Native child did. So there was some degree of government neglect, but I'm always upset about how governments end up accepting weird guilt and then making the taxpayer pay for that guilt that was committed by governments. Like this veil of, judgment-proof veil that exists around politicians, that they never have to pay personally for the perfidy or the criminality they may have committed while they were in office. And I find it unfortunate that we're giving, $30 to $40 billion to 1,800,000 Native Canadians in 1 year alone. Like that's $20,000 per native. They pay fewer taxes in many areas. They have many advantages over the white community. That kind of relationship has to end. We have to stop giving money out of guilt or any other reason. There's no reason for us to give them money. The native band that I live beside, the Seashell Indian band, they are incredibly prosperous. They have huge amounts of property. They own the biggest mall here and charge everybody rent. They have apartment buildings. They have businesses. They have a mining, a quarry. They have like fabulous amounts of land that they can rent out and build on, and they are doing so. So they don't need extra money. We've given them the wherewithal, a capitalist system, lots of land, the right to do business as they see fit. We don't need to do any more. And this is a problem we have with all ethnic groups everybody's an ethnic group of some kind, but we pander to them terribly. We have the ethnic lobby, the Sikh ethnic lobby in Parliament that helps direct this fabulous flow of hundreds of thousands of Sikh and Indian nationals coming into this country almost monthly. We have Somalian lobbies, Sri Lankan lobbies, Chinese lobbies, Indian lobbies, Filipino lobbies, and we have mass migration from all those areas. Coincidentally, the Liberal government is just used as a way to hijack power, influence, and money. I mean, the debt is now $700 billion in the 9 years Trudeau's been in government. That's going to be impossible to ever make up. I don't know how that's supposed to be ever paid off or dealt with. And if interest rates ever go really high, we're going to be screwed. That debt will cost us a fortune, right? And it's all the pandering we do to all the ethnic groups, all the minority groups, the LGP, the alphabet mob. The only people they don't pander to is the white community. But the exception with that is that the bureaucracy in Ottawa and most of our provincial capitals are white. We are paying for a vast middle-class bureaucracy that's largely white, who largely do that kind of white savior stuff with people who are drug addicted or on welfare or seeking. The tremendous amount of money is consumed by a white professional class in the government, just spending tax money, like earning tax money, but not producing anything. So, I would say we have many crises. The denialism bill that you've been working on, Greg, and your great work on the Online Harms Act. I'm really appreciative of what you've been doing, getting it out there. I've recommended your website, which is very nicely laid out, and I commend you for the work you're doing. One thing I'd like to ask anybody who wants to is why has the People's Party of Canada, with all their great platform, not moved the needle in 3 years? Why have they remained sort of stagnant?
I think that is a question for another Twitter space. We could get into it.
But when I look at all the people here, though, I see a lot of PPC sympathizers, right?
For sure.
And yet the question exists is why have we not been able to harness a crisis, several crises, from mass migration to COVID lingering, COVID vaccine denial by governments, from all the things that are going on that the PPC clearly stands in opposition to, including gender ideologies and all.
We don't have seats there, Mark. We're trying to get seats.
No, right, well, but why isn't our percentage of the vote in the polls gone up? Why is it remained 2, 3, 4%? In fact, we got 5% in 2021. So I find it difficult to understand.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. And
also, why is it my generation is 2% support for PPC and kids 18 to 29 are 7%? Like, what happened to my generation that they're all supporting the mainstream parties? Wow, that really is quite stunning.
Yeah. In a nutshell, I think that the propaganda, the messaging for the PPC could much be improved. I don't know what's necessarily it really is kind of a big. I am actually really passionate about this, of how could the PPC be better and stronger. In a nutshell, though, part of the issue, I think, have you heard of the group called Diagolon and Jeremy McKenzie? Real quick, Mark.
Oh, of course, yeah. I've heard of Jeremy. I've certainly seen his stuff.
Sure, I bring that up.
It was a joke, really. But.
Yeah, but I bring it up because these guys were doing a tour. Jeremy and Ferryman were doing a tour this summer, and they went across the country. They did all these speaking events and comedy show things, and the media picked this up, and they were disavowing, they were all over these guys for just doing speaking events. And I bring that up.
That's good. Isn't that good?
But no, it's great. I bring that up because if the PPC was doing its job, they would be getting attacked in the media. But instead, more people who are getting more attention for being like further right is Diagolon. And you know, again, we can go into like diagnosing the problem and talking about, you know, how to improve that. That would be actually a great topic for a Twitter space, to be honest. But that would be that's a whole other kind of topic.
We could actually do that, and we could invite Max to discuss that.
Sure, maybe we'll do that in the
near
future.
That might be fun.
Mark,
by the way, Jim was great, and so was Ferryman's Troll was great.
Yeah.
Mark, I have a question for you. Did you make reference to? So I went to Catholic school, and in the 70s, and I was beaten. I was, you know, the leather strap on my ass, the knuckle or the ruler on my knuckles. I saw the nuns pick boys up by their ears. It was horrendous, you know.
Yeah, in fact, in my
I'm
Miss Hayden washed a boy's mouth out with soap. Literally got the bar of soap in front of all of us and got it wet and shoved it in his mouth because he swore.
Oh yeah. so just talking about like I'm both my brother and I, you know. I mean, I think I've got resolved trauma from that, but there was trauma from that, you know. And we talk about the natives having the trauma from. I dealt with it too in Catholic school. I mean, they were horrendous. I'm not saying what happened to me equates to what happened, whatever, you know. I'm just saying I've been there too with teachers, nuns, and the pastor being the principal, absolutely abusing us kids.
Yeah,
Mark, I want to ask
but you know what? I also remember that we were rotten little kids at times too. Like we saw our job as that to intimidate the
Maybe
teacher.
so.
And so we often were really rotten to her. So when they actually caught us in the rare time doing something, we always deserved it. Nobody was innocent. It's not like the principal decided, yes, I'm going to give you the strap because there's no evidence. No, we saw you fucking punch that kid.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's not like there was like we lacked due process. It's just that life was rough in the 60s. It was rougher in the 50s, 40s, and every generation before then it was rougher. Like
and now no child can be touched in schools.
1910.
No child can be touched in schools. No child can be assaulted. But it seems to be the way to go.
Probably good. The problem is less with the teachers are terrible now, and the curricula is really terrible. But parents are terrible too. Most of the children don't have two parents at home. So the deterioration is there. Now, when people say to homeschool your kids because the system is horrible, I go, well, what am I paying all this money for? I have to go to work on a night shift from 10 o'clock at night to 6:30 in the morning. I have to sleep. I don't have time to teach children my three girls stuff because the LGBT alphabet mafia has invaded our schools. It's our job to clear these schools of all this, disease and cancerous ideas and return it to sanity, not retreat into our home, right? I'm not paying myself to teach my children. I'm paying others, and I expect them to do it. So it's worth fighting to do that. We have 3 girls in the local high school. So, and they're always being bombarded with fucking stickers for all the different sexualities and gender identities, and it's just a ton of bullshit. They've had dildos shown to them, all sorts of bizarre sex objects, toys, weirdo books and stuff, right? Like, it's a lot to keep your kids uncorrupted because the schools love to do that. They really want the kids to talk about whether they're bisexual or pan in the grade fucking 6. Right, yeah. Like none of these children should be having sex. Our girls are up to 17, and we believe that they are not having, and that is not on their radar at this time. So it's unfathomable that schools are constantly promoting this.
Yeah, let's bring it back on topic. Later on, actually, we're going to have Chanel come on the space because
she's great too, by the way.
Yeah, and she was standing up for a conservative politician who was basically saying. The violation of parental rights under gender ideology is similar to the sort of like lack of, it's the same thing as the government kind of imposing these absurd rules that put children at risk in school. Like, and because this conservative politician made this comparison, that's denialism. That's bad. But Mark, we're going to talk about the school system a little bit later. I want to go back to something you said earlier or rather just kind of like your history of being politically activated and politically engaged for a number of years in this country, we're seeing the diversity. It's not just sort of a trend. It's almost like a tyrannical expectation. It's sort of like you must pledge your allegiance to BIPOC and diversity and the rainbow flag. Tell me.
You know what?
No,
Before I went to prison, I never heard the word white privilege. When I came out in 2014, it was everywhere. Before 2010, I had never heard of it before. So it was bizarre how things changed while I was gone so radically.
Yeah, and I'm curious, did you see evidence of this before? Like, did you see evidence of these trends building up
Yeah, I used to fight feminists in the early 80s, and I used to fight environmental lawyers in the early 80s, and I used to fight worker lawyers in the 1980s, and all of these were teachers and profs at the University of Western Ontario, where I'm from, London, Ontario. And I realized starting in the late 70s, the entire university academic structure was being purged of conservatives. They were actually being run out of the university, intimidated, ostracized, pushed away. And I saw all the academic positions in the humanities in the 1980s go to all left-wing academics. And of course, that's what they started to do, is producing acolytes like themselves, who are all left-wing academics who further go out and poison the environment in other universities. So that by the time the 90s were here, you had all these people ready to come out like Manchurian candidates. And suddenly, I saw this with Black Lives Matter, that everywhere, like, how did you get hundreds of health officials to sign a petition endorsing Black Lives Matter in the middle of a pandemic? And that's when I realized people who have come out of university have all been inculcated like Marxist cadres, thousands, tens of thousands of them, hundreds of thousands of them. There are no conservative professors. There are no conservative teachers. There's hardly any male teachers left. In the public school, they're all female. In the high school, they're almost all female or gay men. There are no real heterosexual men teaching anymore. You look at the local school board, it's 7 woke white women, and they are all down with the alphabet mob and the NDP platform provincially, which we have an election in 2 weeks. We're hoping to cancel that, get rid of SOGI, which is sexual orientation, gender identity 1, 2, 3, which is in all our schools and is responsible for this horrible stuff that they are brainwashing our kids with, this sexual bullshit that we're hoping to get canceled in 2 weeks. Big election for us here in British Columbia. And I've been very active in participating. The local Conservative Party candidates disavowed themselves from me when some local radio NDP agitator called them up and said, "Is Mark Emery like in your party? Do you endorse him being a member of your party and promoting you?" And they had to go, "Oh, no, we know nothing about him." Meanwhile, I've been to guys' lectures, given him money, donated $250, signing the law, and then suddenly I'm persona non grata because they don't want to jeopardize their election by being seen with someone who no one's ever actually accused me of being a racist. But Josh Johal didn't even say that, but he was the guy that called him up and said I was an extremist, right? An extremist, that's how they get you, an extremist, which to me just means principled. If you're an extremist, you probably have certain principles that are so important to you, you won't compromise on them. And that's an extremist. But anyway, listen, I'm going on. I have no right to take up your time. And I really enjoyed the show. And I really enjoyed hearing from everybody. And I would love to be the PPC candidate out here in the next election, but they've already got a fine gentleman. So I'll be supporting him and being president of the local West Vancouver Sea to Sky Country Sunshine Coast EDA. Mm-hmm. Certainly in the time ahead.
I just give you a follow, fellow British Columbian. Thank you for contributing to this. Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
Before you go, Mark, again, because you've been kind of like keeping your eye on the ball of Canadian politics for some time, we have something happening that's so patently absurd where you can only talk about history a certain way, as if we're all like history. We're in school in a test, and it's like if you get the facts wrong on this history, you're going to get in trouble. Except it's like this applies to the entire country. It's totally insane. And why aren't more Canadians speaking up about this? What's your take? What's your theory on this?
Well, one thing that I would love to discuss on a show that's not is, for all my life, I thought it was terrible that we interned the Japanese from the Canadian Pacific coast here in 1942. But I no longer feel that way because I've had a revelation about race and Canadianism and being Canadian and what it means to be Canadian. And if I was talking to someone who's to this day, their family is suing the Canadian government for being interned as Japanese people, and I said, but the Japanese were the most bloodthirsty armada on the face of the earth, even worse than the Nazis, killing millions of people, raping millions of women. I said their legacy is shocking and horrific. Why do you think we shouldn't have taken you in as a potential danger to the Canadian war effort? And she said, well, we're Canadian. I said, really? Do you think being Canadian supersedes you being Japanese? I mean, when I look at you, do I see Canadian or do I see Japanese? I see Japanese. So does race trump nationality or citizenship, or does citizenship trump race and culture? And I don't think it does. I think race and culture trump citizenship. And I think we can see proof of that all over. And I think there was a heightened fear of that in World War II, that the Japanese were such a vicious, bloodthirsty, raping, killing, murdering, imperialist force that it didn't matter what citizenship you were, the government couldn't err on the side of caution. They had to take you away and divest you of all your stuff and put you in until the end of the war. And now I'm much more sympathetic to that position than I ever was before, because I've been thinking about it. I said, race and culture trump citizenship. It tells me a lot more where you're from when I look at you and hear you speak and tell me where you're from than it does what your citizenship papers might say, whether it says England, France, Canada, or the United States, right? So anyway, that's just something that's happened to me in recent times.
Absolutely, Mario. No, I really appreciate that perspective. And it is so interesting how it only really works in white Western countries where it's like, someone from India can become Canadian. Someone from Africa can become part of the UK. They can be a Brit.
And I know, it's extraordinary because they can't become Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese, or any place in Africa. In fact, it can only be Europe or North America for some reason. And this mystifies me as to why white Anglo English-speaking countries or European countries are expected to take this mass migration of savages, really, in many cases. I mean, just people completely not ready to be integrated into European or English or North American culture. They're simply not ready for prime time or civilization, and we shouldn't take them.
That last monologue was heckin' based, Mark.
Anyway,
Bang
listen,
on.
Wonderful show, ladies and gentlemen, and I look forward to another one, Greg.
Thanks for coming on, Mark. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mark Emery, the Prince of Pot, ladies and gentlemen.
If I can say one thing about what Mark just said too, and I think this is essential that people understand this, which is what they will tell you is if you are from a European country or European colonial country, they will tell you that, well, actually what makes us who we are is our values. What makes us English is our values. What makes us Canadian is the values we share. What makes us German is the values we share. And it's funny because if you ask them what those values are that make you German or English or Canadian or American or Australian, they're all the same. It's always the same values. It's some vague assertion that we adhere to liberal democratic principles and global, globo homo brown communism. That's what it always amounts to when they tell you, oh, well, it's our values that make us Canadian. No, it's not. It's your blood. Blood is what makes you English. Blood is what makes you German. Blood is what makes you Canadian, American, Australian, etc. And this is the biggest deception that they've pulled on us in our lifetime, is this disconnection between who we actually are and the supplantation of who we are with some vague value system. This is what has allowed them to flood us with all kinds of people from all kinds of places that with. It's crucial that people understand that.
Yes, absolutely.
By the way, one last thing.
Sure.
I wanted to point out that I stole an idea I heard from her. I tweeted it out there, and it's already got 200 likes. I'll read it to you. Do you think Canada could end up like South Africa, with whites a minority surrounded by hostile cultural invaders living in their enclaves throughout Canada, perpetuating their tribal grievances and ethos. In 1981, Vancouver was 85% white. In 2021, Vancouver is just 40% white. In just 40 years, whites became a minority in their own city. And that's already got 184 likes in the space of 1 hour exactly. So that's going to be over 1,000 likes by midnight. And that's just because somebody, I think Fairman's Toll said that. And I thought that's true. I happen to know all the information about Vancouver. And I've been to South Africa, and one of my best friends in the whole world was murdered by 3 black marauders with guns that broke into his home and murdered him in his bed beside his wife. And I've never forgiven that or forgotten it. So yeah, that South Africa reference really stung with me there. So anyway, I just put that out there, and I just heard that on there. So it goes to show you that we're sharing ideas, getting them out there, and that's kind of a good electric kind of thing.
Absolutely, Mr. Emery. Really appreciate it. We might have a couple more guests coming in to speak and kind of give their testimony. But in the meantime, let's bring up some people who got their hands up. I'm pretty sure they're remanded. You've been in here for a while, I think from the beginning. So if you wanted to ask a question to anybody on the panel, or if you had anything to say, then by all means unmute yourself and share.
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had some time to kind of rehearse and revise and revise kind of what I wanted to say. A lot of interesting talk here. Yeah, I mean, we're kind of like after this, I'll have a question for Jim. I as a stay-at-home father of 3, I've decided, me and my wife and I decided to, homeschool our kids, because it just doesn't seem like there's any real option, really. It's just such a chance with where the world is today. So I'll just kind of preface, I guess, where I'm at with that. And there's, I guess a couple of years ago, when the DEI and the critical race theory and all that stuff kind of started getting pumped up, and then things like municipalities that are DEI based, saying, essentially, we're gonna hide white people last, and it just ends up making your children kind of like low, at the bottom of the rung, where it's just like, what kind of future do they have if we're going to end up as a society boiling everything down to race? And so and we see those things like in my wife's work as well, where they have the land acknowledgements, the DEI, everything has to be prefaced with land acknowledgements and all that stuff. And then even in her work, and this is one of the things that I'll hit into before I ask a question, was that we never hear about the chiefs. We never hear about the families of the First Nations who are looked down upon or don't get funding from the chiefs if they speak out on them. One of the projects my wife was on, she had worked on it for, I think, like a half a year or so, and then it got dropped.
Sorry. What project? What's the project? What do you mean project?
School. It was a new school. I don't want to go too far because some people can kind of dive into it, and but it was a school that was proposed, and she was working on it. And so when it got dropped, her boss, who specifically works with First Nations, asked, well, what happened with the project? What happened? And they were in an election, I guess for who's to be like the next chief for X amount of years, and the project was dropped. And so you can kind of, and this is a thing that never gets brought up. It's just, white man bad, government bad. But where's that funding going to? And so when you look at the candidate that would have been, I think it was going to be would have been a female chief, which was, I guess, was looked down upon in the politics involved. They sided with not having a brand new facility or higher education for that reserve. And so that speaks volumes, but nobody is able to speak on that. and so I guess I'll kind of go into my question for Jim. For those, because obviously you're well versed on this, and for those that still kind of attempt to have civil discussion or just more information in general, my kids are going to probably want to know about this stuff. What kind of literature? I mean, if it's on your X feed, but if we end up having discussions with other people, I know that names are triggers, and so if I bring someone up like Joe Blow, whatever, people just get triggered, and then it's a non sequitur. Like you can't have the conversation. So, what literature can we go to that you can provide? Is there a list? Is there something that we can preface with the reports that the governments have come out with? So then the general public who are still looking to find more out about this can then have their own information and facts and not just be like, well, so and so said it, and so that's fact. Thank you.
Well, I'd be happy to answer that, Greg.
Go ahead. Go right ahead.
Okay. And, so people are wanting to know, they know that the government's lying to them. It's very much 1984 Big Brother, where war is peace and ignorance is strength and so forth. So I think there's all sorts of things. Whenever I want to find something, I go to many different places. I think there's a lot of deceit on all sorts of issues in schools, including the ones that are well known, whether it's gender, the trans stuff, race, history, falsification, censorship of literature. There's all sorts of things that kids know they're not getting the goods on. So I don't have any one list. What I recommend as a teacher for kids is to develop critical thinking and reflection. And the way I did that, and I think many people do that, is by reading a lot of books, because that's what books do. They provide different perspectives and help one think better. So I'm sorry if I'm failing you by not providing you with a list, other than just to say the very best thing for children is to read. And if there's any one book that I think is wonderful to read for children, is one that was recently banned in Surrey, and that's To Kill a Mockingbird. Because I think the separate moralities of people like Boo Radley and Atticus Finch and Scout Finch and Tom Robinson and so forth, it's just any literary work like that, which gets students to look at things from different perspectives and to, in many ways, question not only their own morality, but question the morality of the society.
Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for the question. All right, who should we call on next? What is it? Short and long? Short and long, political atheist, over 20 years of service to my country. You go ahead and unmute yourself and ask Jim here a question, or share your thoughts on residential school denialism versus free speech. Are you there? Short and long.
Yeah, I'm here.
How's it going?
I was waiting for you to finish talking. You guys got me loud and clear, or what?
Yeah, we can hear you okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I used to be a true believer. When I got in the military, I used to believe in the UN. I used to believe in all this crap, and I'm a total 180 anymore. Like I don't believe in any of this crap. For example, it's crazy. But the big thing I want to talk about as far as school denialism or residential school denialism, I'm sure some heinous things happened in these schools. Just like any big organization, the Catholic Church has a certain reputation. I'm sure some really crappy stuff happened in these schools. But do you call it a genocide? No. If you want to call it a genocide, and if our prime minister calls it a genocide, well, in that case, you need to call in a third body like the Hague, and you need to investigate this. And then that is the pathway to reconciliation. But they don't want to do that. I brought that up a couple of days ago when all this crap was going on. And I said, hey, why don't you guys do that? You're a racist. So that tells me right off the bat, they don't care about reconciliation. They don't care about truth. All they want to do is get the gives. And that's it. Cheers.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for sharing that, sir. Thanks for your service. Let's go off to, what is this, Lisette? Lisette, are you there? Do you have a question for Jim? Or any comments on residential school denialism? Lysette?
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Yes. Okay. All right. First of all, thanks a lot for having this space. Excuse me. And thanks a lot for having me up here. I think all of us know why they're doing this. And it's just another form of white guilt, right? So in America, you have slavery, but we didn't have slavery that bad, even though we were told we did. So, we have to go with, Aboriginals. And we know in Australia, they're going with their Aboriginals. And of course, in Europe, they're going with colonialism. So it's all the same playbook. So, why are we even bothering to, debate it? Was it good? Was it bad? Hey, I went to Catholic school. I had it bad too. That's crazy. It's a psyop. It's a great, and the only way out of it is just to say no. In my neighborhood, I have signs on, I've seen signs on poles that say we are on stolen land, and I get my Sharpie, and when no one's looking, I write fuck off on it. I don't put up with it. And
Okay.
I think, Canadians, we are just so nice, right? Hey, I went to school and I had it bad too, but hey, don't you see what's going on? Don't you see what they're doing to white people? That they are guilting us out to the point where we're just going to roll over and give it all away, which is what is happening. And it's already being done. We're all these savages coming in. All these savages are going into employment. They're going into management. They're going into government. They're taking over. They're going to be making the laws. Already the guy who wants to pass the law on canceling our free speech, he's an immigrant he's an Indian by way of Dubai, by way of Africa or something or other.
It's Uganda.
Uganda, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate your perspective, which is, why are we giving any of this the benefit of the doubt? Because you're right, especially if you look across the world, everything's kind of happening in the same way. Just same with COVID, everything kind of happened the same way, right? It was let's lock people down. It was the same way across the world, and there's specific to this issue. Let's use indigenous people as a crowbar to kind of pull away or push away the usually European descended population from their rights, from their land, from their identity itself, and aside.
And it's not us I worry about. It's young people. Imagine growing up and having to say every morning, I don't know what they say, we're on stolen land or something or other. And imagine all the crap that they're teaching. And a lot of teachers today aren't white. A lot of them, especially in cities, they're from India, they're from Pakistan, they're from all over the place. Do you think that they're gonna rub in the white guilt? Isn't it in their best interest to do so?
It's certainly trendy. It's certainly a trendy thing that is endorsed and basically co-signed by a lot of the political and media establishment in this country. So you certainly bring up a lot of good points, Lysette. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we move on to someone else?
My name is Lizette.
Sorry,
but anyway,
Lizette.
Okay, what I want to say is, white Canadians, what is wrong with us? Why are we so fucking weak? When I go on spaces hosted by, Americans, they are so, the men, they are so, and Canadians, it's we don't have any spine. And so many white Canadians are virtue signalers, right? Huge, massive virtue signalers. And it's the good whites versus the bad whites. And hey, guess what? We're the bad whites. And you want to know why the People's Maxime Bernier's party? Because good white Canada won't tolerate Maxime Bernier. They can't handle Donald Trump. You really think Maxime Bernier has a chance? Anyway, that's all I have to say. I'm disgusted with Canada. That's it.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing that. I definitely related to a lot of what you were saying there. Why are we such pussies? You look at America and they have this autonomy about themselves. Our Constitution. And in some ways, the Constitution thing, it's it'd be better if it was more about, the identity of the country and not a piece of paper. but still, like, we don't even have that to rely on here in Canada.
Well, we were known as peacekeepers. We have a reputation for being kind and passive, but it's gotten to be, it's weak and complacent, right?
And that's also a lie.
It is a lie. It is a lie,
yeah.
but that was our reputation on the world stage.
Well, it became, if I'm not mistaken, it kind of became our reputation somewhere around like the 50s or the 60s, where that became the whole like rhetoric of like, we're a bunch of pussy peacekeepers, where in reality there's a lot of really cool Canadian history that I'd love to hear more about. But, it's going to take where this really is. Part of the reason I started SaveFreeSpeech.ca is like, I want to look at the more sort of long-term solution. Like there's not going to be any sort of simple solutions to what we're facing. They're trying to take away our freedom of speech with multiple different vectors of attack. No one seems to be opposing mass migration and demographic replacement, which is becoming abundantly obvious, even to people who are apolitical in this country, which is fascinating. And unfortunately, as it was kind of mentioned, the PPC really isn't tapping into that in a more effective way that I think they should.
Oh, they are. Bernier just posted a picture of a Sikh shitting near a river and said Canada is becoming a shithole country.
No way.
Which is the kind of rhetoric that I have been dying for.
Yes, and Max will do it.
See, what I found it interesting when Lizette was going off there, because the truth is Canadians are becoming more racially conscious in the last year or so than they have been probably since the 50s or 60s. And it's almost entirely due to mass immigration, specifically from India. Nothing will radicalize you more than being surrounded with Indians, because they are so diametrically different to us in every conceivable way that when you're just placed in the vicinity of them and forced to live amongst them, it's going to have an effect on your racial consciousness and make you understand that, hey, I don't really like living like this. And as you're seeing, Canadians are becoming slowly more vicious towards foreigners. And I think this is a trend that's going to continue, and it will only be exacerbated by the fact that there's not a single institution, department of government. There's no organizations, academic institute, like with the exception of arguably the PPC, there's nothing that's giving these people an outlet for how they feel and how they rightly feel. Like they're totally justified in feeling this way about their situation. And in a situation like that, what you will find is that inevitably that ire, that contempt, that dissatisfaction will be directed towards the people who are causing it. So I don't know, you don't have to like it, but I think it's important to understand that Canadians are probably going to become a lot more racist in the future. And it's like, look, it's directly result. It's very easy to say like, oh, I have no problem with Indians or China. I have no problem with these people when you don't live next to them constantly. Fences make good neighbors. Right? But when you force all these people into the same city and there's no dominant culture and everybody is vying for their own collective ethnic interests, watch how quickly that disintegrates into just a tribal, conflict or confrontation. It's inevitably going to get worse, and nobody's doing anything about it. So even just seeing that from Bernier's been really good the last week, I've noticed. And it's because he's tapping into this very primal, very vulgar, very brutal, I like the term grug, caveman kind of tribalism and racism. Like, I don't know that is the most, look, it's the most powerful argument. I know this is not what the space is about, and I don't mean to hijack it.
He's changed he's been doing, since our conference in Victoria, there was a lot of people just plain speaking, and he knew he was affecting the crowds more with his plain speech. And just being real, and the way he's, and a lot of people were saying, you gotta kick up your social media presence. You really gotta get at that. And I think he's changing his ways. I mean, not that he wasn't. It's just being, it's more obvious now. And I really, really like what he's saying and what he's doing. And that's exactly what we need. And I know it can be crass. It can be a little Trumpish, whatever. I don't give a shit. We need that. We absolutely need that.
Yeah, and it's definitely not irrelevant to the space, because I think we've done a good job at defining the problem here, and it is related to racial identity, because residential school denialism and Truth and Reconciliation Day, I do believe like the main goal or the main sort of outcome is let's normalize the resentment and hatred of white people, and in effect that's kind of what's happening, and really. Bernier, with his platform, with an established party, with the fact that he does have tenure in the House of Commons, there's a lot of legitimacy there. He really is the best positioned to help fight against this, help fight back against this. And I think, maybe it would be worthwhile to have a space on that. It was sort of a private conversation, but I did go to a PPC event last week, and I did get a chance to speak to him. And I was explaining to him, I was showing him like the Instagram, and I'm like, yo, like all of the, and I was going to Six Buzz. For those who don't know Six Buzz, they really post a lot of, inflammatory kind of like clickbait, rage bait, outrageous, dramatic stuff. If people didn't know, there was a recent video of a Uber Eats driver spitting in someone's drink, which is just like such detestable behavior.
See, Greg, this is the thing that I find so fascinating. I was talking about this on the last.
I heard your take on this. I heard your take on this,
and it's so fascinating to me that it's like, for years I've been trying to tell Canadians, like, look, it's affecting housing. Look, it's affecting healthcare. Look, it's suppressing wages. It's making it so that your kids can't get an entry-level job. It's, disenfranchising you. It's creating a population trap. It's destroying our economy. It's a complete drain on like all these things. And these are all true, and they're all valid, and they're all good arguments. But you know what? That isn't what really worked, surprisingly, at convincing Canadians that mass immigration is not good for them. Surprisingly, what it takes is seeing an Uber Eats driver spit in somebody's drink. Apparently that's it's seeing a Sikh man pooping next to a river. That's what really does it. It's seeing an Indian, take his ass out at a gas station. It's watching, Muslims poach fish in a river. Like, it's not, none of these charts, these statistics, these economic arguments, they don't work as well as just, hey, these people suck. Like, look at what they're doing to our country. Like, it's fascinating to me that, unfortunately, I don't even necessarily like it, but the truth is, this kind of like just basic tribalism is actually what's going to wake Canadians up more than any kind of academic or intellectual argument you can make about it. It's just the reality.
It is a fascinating phenomenon that we've seen over the past maybe 6 to 9 months, where having an anti-immigrant sentiment is becoming more popular. And as I said earlier, like with apolitical people, and I think you're absolutely right. It's like, okay, now that they're spitting in someone's Uber Eats delivery, like, okay, maybe this is a problem. And I think, to get into the psychology real quick, the disgust instinct is like a very strong and deep one that we all have. And it sort of supersedes your politics, even if you're like a far left progressive. It's like you see something disgusting like that, and it's like, wait a minute, maybe I am a bit racist. Wait, what's going on here? It is. You were talking about this earlier, Ferryman, which is, we are sobering up to this reality, this tribal reality of multiculturalism. Like, we've seen Justin Trudeau for the past 9 years preach the benefits of diversity and multiculturalism. And it's here. Now it's here. How do we like it? And of course, there's very, very ugly realities to that. And what else is there to say other than, the far right continues to be vindicated. It's so, this is kind of off topic, but it's so funny that, the PPC and Max Bernier, I ran in 2019, gets thrown under the bus for daring to oppose multiculturalism and mass migration. And now the same journalists who are smearing us in 2019 are like, maybe mass migration is a problem. Here's why. It's like, it's just, yeah.
Do you mind if we, just a sec, guys, I just want to do some housekeeping. Can we drop a few and get some people back, like on the panel? Like maybe somebody who has done speaking, can we drop down and let a few more people up, please?
Yeah, that would be great. Did you want to say something, Ferry? I was going to go to the son of.
I was just going to say the thing that I find really fascinating about this PPC arc is that, look, in hindsight, it's easy to see this now, but the truth is that everything they did to try and convince, the people that they weren't racist and that, really it was not about race, it was about culture, and it wasn't about, any particular group, any of this kind of stuff. In hindsight, that was the mistake. They should have just leaned into it from the beginning. Because the truth is that the only way that you can defeat these accusations is by not caring about them anymore. you win whenever you stop trying to convince people you're not racist and you just say, okay, I'm racist. Now what?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, I admit it. I'm racist. Yep. Now let's talk about what's actually going on.
Perfect. And that's exactly what the politicians were afraid of. I don't want to be called a racist, so they don't talk. Exactly.
And to be frank, I think that Bernier was playing this game. And I think honestly, from the way I see it, until very recently, he was playing this game of I'm not going to be like, I'm going to do everything I can to not be perceived as being racist. And from what I'm seeing now, it seems like he's decided that, fuck it, let's do it, because this is not working. This game of being, well, I'm not, it's never going to work, because for the reasons I stated earlier, these people don't actually believe you're racist, or if they do, there's no way that you're going to convince them that you are racist. It's purely a power game. Their only concern is how can I silence you? It's not a good faith position that they come from. The only thing they're trying to do is beat you. It's a pure power game. It's pure just basic aggressive cutthroat politics. That's the game they're playing, and you're playing the game of, well, if we can just convince enough people that we're not racist, then maybe we can talk about ending mass immigration. It's never going to work. You have to just lean into it.
Yeah, and it is super misguided and naive, because the liberal establishment has made the rules, and the rules are you can't advocate for yourself, or else we'll call you evil. and then right-wing people are like, okay, let's play by those rules. That's the rules that the Conservative Party is playing by. Well,
they want us to self-censor.
Yeah, we have to play by the liberal establishment's rules. And it's like, okay, so we can't have the media call us a name. And it's like, okay, so you're going to lose every single debate, and you're going to continue to slide to the left. And we've all seen this happen. Let's move on to the son of Plaid, Mr. Edgy D. You had a video recently where you went to the, it's not necessarily, it's definitely adjacent to what we're talking about. You went to, what was it, like a diversity town hall.
So first of all, thanks for having this space. It's great to hear everyone's perspective on this. If you don't use your free speech, you're going to lose it. And True. I went with very little notice on what was actually going on. I found out about it on the morning of. And so in St. Catharines, they were hosting a town hall meeting for DEI. And specifically, they have a DEI action plan for 2023 to 2027 for the whole Niagara region. But this was to ask questions to the mayor of St. Catharines. So I asked him point blank, using the terminology from his own DEI action papers that they abide by, why they have excluded white people. And it was my first time ever speaking at a town hall meeting, and it was very eye-opening and revealing as to how these things work, because I was met with sneers, heckling, derision from a whole, dozens of activists who all knew each other and all knew the mayor on a first-name basis, and all were pulling at his pant leg, trying to get whatever they can from him. But I thought that was very revealing.
Yeah, and it speaks to what I think the ferryman was saying earlier, which is, BIPOC is everything but white people. Diversity is everything about white people. And these are things that people need to sort of wake up to. And similar to what we're doing with SaveFreeSpeech.ca, stopping hate. That's every form of hatred that's against BIPOC people and against diverse people. So you can hating white people and hating Canadian history, hating patriots, hating right wingers, all of that is actually co-signed and ignored by the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Has actually explicitly said this. These are the hate experts in Canada who have explicitly said, we focus on the far right and we're proudly anti-fascist. So the hate experts are like, yeah, we don't really care about hatred towards or violence for that matter towards white people. And it's
all baked into the cake, right? because like it's not just BIPOC. That's just one very obvious example of it, because obviously it includes everybody but white people, but marginalized people, vulnerable groups, protected peoples. They have about like 5 or 10 different synonyms for this exact same term, which ultimately includes everybody but white people.
Right. Right. And is there anything else that you wanted to add there, Mr. Edgy D, Mr. Son of Plaid?
Yeah, I would just say that it was kind of a joke experiencing what goes on at a town hall and how these municipal politics actually work. But at the end of the day, it felt amazing speaking my mind there, uh, despite all the attempts at humiliation they tried to do to you. It was great. It was like getting it was like relieving myself of like taking this load off of my chest, essentially. And I would suggest that everybody does it in public every chance that they can get. Come prepared and give your opinion and fight back against them, because day in and day out, these perpetual left-wing activists are at these town hall meetings. They have uh, they have the ear of the mayor, your city councilors, everybody. So we need to start going into their territory and telling them that they have some opposition.
I totally agree with that. And I know there's a lot of people who say like, hey, like there's no political solution. And I understand where they're coming from, but you know, we need to stop being so overwhelmed with fear with everything that's going on and look at the long term and start looking at solutions and looking at winning over, normies, apolitical people. Because as things get crazier and more insane, they're going to be looking for solutions. Normies are going to be looking for solutions. And when people like us start to, build organizations or building a following or building a network or community of like-minded people who are, trying to do the right thing, it's important to start building that up. So when people actually do get red pilled in some sense, there will be a solution. Now, I want to bring Chanel on. I need to go find the tweet, but I'm going to give a quick sort of like summary of how you're related to the residential school denial talk when it comes to free speech. But essentially, a conservative, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chanel, a conservative politician said, "Hey, speaking of residential schools where kids were mistreated by government sort of institutions or like government mandates, there's this thing going on right now called the gender ideology, where it's taking parental rights away, where kids are sort of being prey victim to this gender ideology, where down the line they might be convinced to chemically castrate themselves or go on hormones as a child and potentially ruin their lives because their minds have been indoctrinated with very questionable material." And the conservative politician who said this, made this comparison, has been canceled. They're being disavowed by the conservative party that they're in. But I apologize, Chanel. Maybe I butchered that. I don't even know if it's a provincial conservative or what. But could you fill in the blanks for us? Hi, by the way. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, hi. So it's Sherry Wilson. She's a PC candidate for in New Brunswick, and I don't think she was necessarily disavowed. I don't think she is actually canceled or anything. She's still running, but she did delete her statement, which is unfortunate. She had it posted around 2 p.m. on Truth and Reconciliation Day. And then I think she had it deleted by about 11. A follower told me that. So I only saw it the next day. So I came to her defense not knowing she had already deleted it. Then I saw that the premier had, I think his comment was that she missed the mark on with that statement. And he obviously had a lot of pressure from, well, the woke mob to not let her run anymore. I don't think he has caved to those demands. He just basically said, she shouldn't have said it, but he's keeping her in, I think. So. Um, well, kind of, not really actually. Like most of the stuff I post, I'm actually finding myself. Like I basically just look up what they're doing. I have an alternate Twitter account and I follow a lot of them and I know what they're up to and I know what keywords they use and I just spend a lot of time um, searching for exactly what they're doing because a lot of these teachers are proud to be promoting woke ideology in their classroom, right? They think that they're doing the right thing. They'll take a picture of what they did that day, what book they read, what activity they did, and then they'll post it and they'll say, "Yay, look at me. Look at this inclusive activity I did." And I screenshot that and I post it and I just give the info of what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, and one tweet I remember that you shared, and I certainly think it's relevant to the residential school denialism day, because people in the space have kind of been making this argument that it really feels like it's validating the resentment and hatred towards Canadians who are white or Canadians who are proud at all of our history. And you posted, it said something about white girl tears are something about oppressing, like
Oh yeah, I can
BIPOC
send that
girls or
to
something.
you.
That was one, and then the other one talked about like what is privilege or something as well. But I guess if you could, we don't need the like we know it's out there. You don't need to like go searching for it. But maybe in like broad brushstrokes, like what kind of trend are you seeing when it comes to this? In terms of the material being taught in school around white privilege. Have you seen any that's about the residential school stuff?
Oh yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot about the decolonization stuff. There's lies about residential schools. There's schools that are, still to this day putting up 215 ribbons or 215 whatever it is to honor the lives lost, things like that. Um, there's a lot more happening that I like. Obviously, the indoctrination happens all the time. Then there's a small portion of the teachers who are indoctrinating who post about it. Then there's a small portion of those that I see and a small portion of those that I post. So, like, this is happening way more than people imagine it to be happening, I think. I've been in a school myself. I mean, I'm not a teacher anymore, but I was a teacher up until 2021 and I saw it in my own school. Teachers were talking about activities they did with their class on white privilege and all this stuff. This was early on when I was still, I used to be somewhat woke adjacent, and then I woke up in 2020. So I was still piecing it together a little bit that year, and I was observing more than anything. But there was a lot of really crazy stuff happening. Um, and just parents need to be paying attention. I mean, I'm afraid I'm not going to be that hopeful person. I'm quite cynical about everything that's happening at this point. There's not many people speaking up in 2021 when I stopped teaching. I spoke up about it, and at the time, I thought, okay, this is going to be it. Like other people are going to follow suit, and we're going to get like a large number of teachers who come out and say, look, this is not okay. And that just hasn't really happened. There are some teachers like Jim McMurtry and a few others that have come out, but it's a very small number. I think in schools, teachers that I talk to, I have a lot of contacts in different schools across the country, and a lot of them say they don't think that most of the teachers are enthusiastic about this stuff. However, nobody's really speaking up against it. So everybody's just silent, and you can't really get that far with that, right?
Yeah, and oh man, that really pains me to hear that. I've started this project, SaveFreeSpeech.ca, to stop Bill C-63, and one thing is stopping the legislation, which would essentially allow the government to easily weaponize this new legislation against people who they don't like, or have the wrong opinion, or who intensely dislike someone. Like, to give you an example, when it comes to the gender indoctrination, if I were to publicly disavow this gender indoctrination, you could argue that I'm bullying a trans child and get my stuff taken down off the internet, and then say that, all sorts of stuff. It's crazy what's in this bill. But I've realized that, the cultural stuff is almost even more important, which is, do Canadians even want their free speech? They don't even use their free speech. They all agree, not all of them, but like many people agree that they disagree with the gender ideology, or that maybe they disagree with this, sort of colonization narrative of white privilege, but no one says anything. No one says anything. Everyone's too afraid to say something. And it's like, okay, if that continues to be the case, do we even deserve our free speech? Like, do we even have the will as Canadians to even fight for our free speech? Like, this is kind of what keeps me up at night. And I'm hoping to, encourage Canadians in the right direction. But, what are your thoughts on that, Chanel?
I mean, I totally agree. It's like, when are people going to wake up? So many people think that this is just a little phase and it's going to pass. And, it's not a big deal if we're writing things into law and passing bills against free expression and all that. And that's just not the case. It's like, I guess Canadians are just, we seem to be quite ignorant of history and how.
Thank you, Silverman and Buddy, for the $100.
Become authoritarian and totalitarian. It starts with small steps, right? So we need to do something about it now, and just through being courageous, hopefully inspire others to be courageous.
Yeah. The totalitarian tiptoe, as they call it. Like, it's slowly but surely it encroaches upon us. And it's simple, but I think you're right. It's as simple as being courageous and standing up. And I really think that a lot of the people in the sort of right wing right now, in this Twitter space, who are, further right, I think that, we're going to look back and be like, yeah, we were the early adopters of just standing up and telling the truth. You know what I mean? I think that we're on the right side of history. We have the truth on our side, all of these things. And that's why we're all here. There's something inside all of us that's kind of drawing us to be like, something is wrong here. I cannot just shut up about this, right? And I think that's very powerful that the people on this call are able to listen to that and to speak up and do the right thing. I'm curious, where should we go next? Chanel, did you want to add anything else? Maybe we'll bring on someone to ask a question.
Meltel has been waiting a while too.
Is anyone getting the sort of like the jagged audio going on right now?
One thing.
Sorry. Go ahead, Chanel.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Or is it just me?
It might just be on my end, to be honest.
Oh.
Go ahead, Chanel. Go ahead.
Okay, hopefully. So I was just going to say one thing. Like, I've heard a lot of talk. I've been in and out, so I haven't heard the whole conversation, but I hear people say, like, and talk about white people or like Indians or whatever, right? We're talking about these groups, and I just really hope that people are making the difference or distinguishing between an ideology that claims to represent these groups and the people in these groups. Because personally, I don't care if you're Indigenous or if you're Indian or whatever. I view you as an individual. I'm going to have respect for you. I'm going to treat you. I want is for people to start how to, like, you know what I mean. I just really hope that people will continue to judge people as individuals and not as a member of their group. I think that's a dangerous road to go down.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're alluding to here, or like the way I would describe it is focusing on what you love and what you prefer, and not being caught up in the fear and the resentment, and like dwelling in the hatred. You know, because I think that the issue here, especially when it comes to the residential school denialism and what's being taught in school about white privilege is, you know, every single member of the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous person of color, they can totally celebrate their history, where they come from, everything. But the second that a white person tries to do that, they get villainized, they get demonized. And I think it is important when fighting this fight is to not get caught up in the resentment and the fear and the hatred, because then we almost fulfill the prophecy of acting like demons because we're not focused on the love and the self-respect. For me, it's about self-respect, and it's about honoring myself. It's about honoring, like, you know, my ancestors and the country and what's good about it, and kind of not letting people rewrite history and sort of.
Right. Absolutely. You should. Yeah, like I agree with that. You should be you shouldn't be made to feel guilty about being white. You should be proud of your heritage. That's fine. What I'm saying is, like, there is a difference between the ideology being pushed, like the ideas being wrong or crappy, and the actual people that we're dealing with. Like do you know what I mean? Like, I think we're falling into this slippery slope where we're kind of painting with the same brush. So LGBT people, for example, are not the queer ideology. Those are separate things. So, like, I just see the ideology in the people.
Uh-oh. Is anything working right now? My Twitter space is really lagging at the moment. Is it working again? Can you guys hear me?
Can you hear me? Greg, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you guys fine. So
Okay.
I think my computer's
I can hear
bugging
Greg
out.
fine.
Can you guys can hear
so
me?
yeah, I think yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Go ahead, Ferryman.
I think it's interesting what Chanel just said. So this is something that gets brought up a lot, and this argument used to resonate with me. The individualist argument, the idea that, like, look, if we could all get along a lot easier.
Chat, what do I do? How do I fix this?
This is nonsense. I'm sorry. I know you don't have to like it. I don't necessarily like it all the time either. But the reality is that, the term identity politics gets thrown out all the time. The truth is that politics is an identity game. That's exactly what it is. Politics has always been about serving certain identifiable groups. It was about protecting specific folk, a specific ethnic group. This is why we have these things. Politics is something that derived, or evolved as a way of allowing a group to face existential threats. It was about being able to mobilize your people. The modern nation state itself is an expression of ethnic identity. Everything we have in this world,
I feel so much better.
These kinds of systems. And basically what they've done is contrived a situation where they tell every other identifiable group that they are allowed to act in their collective interests, as they actively tell you that when you do it, you're the woke right, and that's identity politics, and that's bad. You are being handcuffed as you are being beaten to death, and then you're being told that if you act in your own interests, you're evil. I'm sorry. I wish we could have the world that Chanel is describing, where we just didn't judge each other based on these things, and we didn't see the difference in race, and we didn't see these things, but it's just not true. And unless we, Canadians, white Canadians, start asserting ourselves as a group and, looking out for our own interests and identifying that we are, in fact, a distinct group, that we do have a specific set of values, that we do have a distinct culture, history, heritage, all of these things, then we're just going to be continued to be walked all over by these other groups. So I don't know.
I hear you.
That's my perspective on it. I'm tired. I'll put it this way. I'm tired of being told that I have to be an individual while all of these other groups are, coalesced into one BIPOC mob and then used to bludgeon me. So, what? It's not for me to stop acting in my collective interests. If you want that, I would suggest you take that to the BIPOC and to the left and you tell them to stop doing it. Because it's not us who started this. It's the other side. And so now this has become a matter of survival. If we don't start asserting ourselves as a collective group, we are doomed. Simple as.
I find it really interesting that you think that you see it as they're pushing you to be more of an individual and less of a collective, because I actually see it the opposite.
Well, they are.
I think they're trying to make us into more of a collective and forget our individual.
Liberalism is individualism.
Hold on. Let Chanel reply.
Enhance, please.
Well, that's basically all I wanted to say, is just point out that I just think that's interesting, because from my perspective, they're trying to eliminate individualism, and from your perspective, they're trying to eliminate collectivism and make you into an individual.
I'm sorry, this sucks, guys. I'm sorry. I don't know why.
They are trying to eliminate your individualism if you are part of the minority groups, which isn't even a minority group anymore. Okay. If you are white, they are trying to individualize you and atomize you as much as possible, because fundamentally, the system that we currently live under operates entirely under a framework which is anti-white.
So what happens to a white person who talks the talk of the ideology, goes along, admits their white privilege? They're treated really well. What happens to a black person who says, hey, I don't like this shit? They're going to be treated just the same as us. So I think we have to revise that theory that it's all about hating white people, actually.
It's very simple.
It's about hating people who don't go along with the ideology.
What you've just described is two different kinds of traitors. So, for example, the white people who engage in this anti-white system, they're called traitors. They've existed for as long as, humans have, documented, recorded history. They opened the gates of Toledo. They're the Benedict Arnolds. They're the, insert your example that you'd like of a traitor. Of course they exist. These are people who put their own selfish interests above those of their people and their heritage, which is why they're willing to throw everybody else under the bus if it gives them a better place in the regime. The other example you gave of, say, a black person who doesn't go along with it is perceived as being a traitor by the other side because they have gone against their collective interests. And so the other thing that you're describing is these are the outliers. These are the outliers of the situation. So yeah, of course you have exceptions to every rule, but generally these rules apply. Look at what's going on right now in America. You have like 80-something% of blacks who are going to vote Democrat. Like, so yeah, of course there are blacks for Trump, but the reality is that the vast majority of them vote for what they perceive to be is in their best collective interest. Who is going to give them the most? Every other group operates like this except for whites. It's very simple.
Yeah, can we go to people have been waiting, so Jody, Mattel, and then Kat.
Yeah, no, this is an interesting topic though. I do want to. Can you guys hear me okay? Because the audio on my end is not good. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, yeah, no, I do think Chanel is onto something here though, because it's like people who oppose the ideology, like let's say the residential school denial, they can still very much get on our side in wanting to fight for free speech. And I think it's important to not make it all about being white. You know what I mean? I think there is a small distinction there that I think is important, because we want more people on our side. We want people who are non-white to be like, yeah, it's actually really shitty how you're being treated, by being demonized with this residential school denialism. Like, this is something that everyone can get on board white and non-white alike because it's wrong. Like recognizing that, the colonizers are being demonized. Like, it's more people can get on board with that. Obviously, I think where Ferryman is coming from is like, well, the people being demonized have the most to lose, and the people who are non-white, the willingness for them to stand up for us because of tribalism is, they're also.
But you say stand up for us, stand up for themselves. Like standing up for freedom and individualism and all these values that I'm standing up for, even if they're Black, that's in their best interest. Upholding, the principles of Western society is in their best interest. It's not. I don't operate with this like race-centric view that you guys seem to have. It's I don't know. I just disagree fundamentally with a lot of what I'm hearing here, but that's just me.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Dying. It goes back to, so one thing I haven't heard mentioned all night is the crown. The crown. Because as much as like growing up, we always heard, oh, the crown doesn't have much to do with Canada, blah, blah, blah. The Indian and the Indian is the key to, we have to get rid of the crown in order to have whatever we're talking about here. Us white, the Indian is the only one that can get rid of the crown, and that's why they continuously oppress them and pay them off and do what they do. I got to gather my thoughts. I've never spoken in this space or anything. I've never spoken on anything. But
sure. So what are you talking about with a crown?
The crown is the key, and the crown, the British royal crown is the key. All our politicians, nobody's going to do anything for us because they are sworn to the crown. All of them are. They're not for us. It all goes back to the crown. We have to get rid of the crown. Now, the only nation, really, if you want to call it a race, that can get rid of the crown is the Indian here in Canada.
Yeah,
us white people need to.
Are we going
to? I hear what you're saying. I hear where you're coming from.
And I'm not talking out of my ass. I've done a lot of research.
Greg, you mind if we speak for a minute? Before?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I hear where you're coming from, Meltel. The only problem with, I know you've done the research and all this. The only problem with that is like this is kind of like the whole sovereign citizen. Like if you look into the legislature, that it's really the crown. This isn't going to change because, there's so much explanation that needs to happen for somebody to understand all of this. And it's just so far away from anybody understanding, get on board with that. Like we can hardly even get people on board with opposing the gender ideology in schools, and that should be a really simple one for the average person to be able to get up off their couch and be like, hey, something's wrong here. So this idea of, going way back into documents that have to do with the crown, like it's so far away for the average person to understand that. So and respectfully, I just feel like a lot of that sovereign citizen stuff, it's I don't think it's really going to be the stuff that activates people, whereas something like the sort of the demonization of us as colonizers and seeing stuff being taught in school that's kind of absurd, like that's going to be a much more sort of visceral thing that gets people activated and actually speaking up about stuff. I did get I do want to quickly go back to Chanel, though. I saw a message in my chat, which is ask Chanel what she thinks of CRT, or critical race theory. Did you want to speak to that? Maybe she's gone. Someone said.
So for some reason, no. So for some reason, you muted people, so I just unmuted.
Oh,
it's all good.
Sorry. My bad. Okay, my bad. Sorry. Yeah, my bad. I'm being a tyrant here, muting everybody. No free speech for anyone. Go ahead, Chanel.
I mean, it's of course I despise critical race theory. I think it's horrible. We're dividing kids into groups based on the race. We're telling them that white people are oppressed and black people are oppressed and white people are privileged, and that these power structures exist whether you like it or not. And unless you're willing to say, yep, these power structures exist, you are the bad guy. It's an ideology that's absolutely horrible. It's being pushed in all of our schools. I mean, it's not taught directly, right? No teacher is going to their class, okay, maybe in grade 11 or 12, but no teacher is going up to grade 2 kids and saying, hey, this is critical.
I'm so sorry, chat. This is hard to listen to.
This is there. It's put into action. I don't know if there was a more specific. Oh, I don't know. Have you lost me? Can you hear me? Oh, you're
No, you're
okay.
good. You're good. I just really need to stress that I don't know how much time you have, Greg, but there have been a few speakers that have DM'd me, and they would really like an opportunity to say something. So we have.
Yeah, you're right. We've been going for a while.
Jody
yeah, go ahead. Who's up?
Okay, go ahead, Jody.
Hi, Rachel. You at the revision conference in Gatineau. You gave me your card. And
Uh-oh. I hope I didn't nuke it. Uh-oh. Did I just nuke it?
I left my neighborhood of 35 years a couple weeks ago because of mass immigration. So my riding, I'm in Manitoba. I'm in Winnipeg. The riding I'm in is a Liberal riding, and it was inundated with a couple 100,000 people from mostly the Punjab area of India, some Hindus. It already had a very heavy Filipino community that was from like the immigration in the 1990s. It's a very large riding. On one side of it is mainly Indigenous Canadians, and then on the other side where I was with my partner, I was actually on both sides over the last 35 years with my ex-husband. So I watched my neighborhood dramatically change within a matter of about a year, not even a year and a half, about 14 months. And it went from a very quiet, neat, tidy neighborhood with a fairly multicultural feel, which Winnipeg has already had, to being it felt like, well, we get the nickname Little Brampton, Little India. It went from, I used to hear English. I didn't hear it anymore. I go up my backyard. All I ever heard was Punjabi. There was signs in another language. I found out later was Hindu advertising crackers. Every.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Shit, guys. I think I nuked it. Fuck. Oh, my God. That sucks. I think I just nuked the stream. I think I just nuked the space. I didn't mean to. It was getting so laggy on my computer I couldn't even hear it anymore. Is it over? I think it's over. Shit. Crap. Space was disconnected. Guys, I'm so sorry. Fuck, man. Shit. My computer's basically frozen. And I can't even reload Twitter right now. It's frozen. God damn it. Well, there you go. There you go. That was it. I mean, there's no point in restarting it, right? Sorry, folks. Sorry, folks. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for all the donations, guys. I saw people were handing out memberships and everything. I just want to make a quick tweet to, address what just happened. Everyone's like, what the hell? Greg nuked the stream. I didn't mean to. Okay. Sorry, folks. My computer just crashed. Great discussion. Free to listen to. Oh, man. I mean, I got this big computer. It's like, try to. Hey there, I'm on a live stream right now. I know everything got nuked. Are you? Yeah.
No. What do you mean? The space disconnected.
Yeah, I know. My computer crashed.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, I know. We're just gonna. That's that's it. Unfortunately, it's over. I'm live right now. I don't know if you wanted to chat to the people who are live, but like I'm live on YouTube.
Those people on YouTube.
Yep.
Messages left and right, compliments left and right. I think the next one we could do is, if you're interested, or again, don't want to step on your toes, but to get Max and talking about the PPC's platform about all this.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I think that would be interesting. I think there's a lot of appetite for that conversation. And yeah, but I'm just gonna wrap up this live stream. I'll have to figure out the technical issues for next time. It's unfortunate, but thanks for helping organize this and with your help moderating. I mean, I'm really happy with it. It was my first time hosting a space, and I thought it went really well. So yeah, let's do another one. But yeah, we'll talk again later. Okay, I'm gonna run. I gotta figure some of this stuff out. All right, talk to you later. Bye. I'll send some messages to people. Sorry, my computer crashed. Hoping? Thanks for hopping on. How are we doing, chat? Is this fun to watch me scramble around here? I can't believe. Yeah, I know the space is cooking. I know. But I couldn't even hear it. Was the problem? I couldn't even hear it. And like it was, yeah. And then like the Twitter basically froze. Like I couldn't even click on it. And then I started listening on my phone, and then it just got nuked. So I'm thinking it might be more stable on mobile, which is crazy. That's crazy. But what did you guys think? It was a good chat, right? Lee says Telegram is a known suspect to interfere. I closed Telegram. I was closing all the apps. I was closing all of it. Oh shit, it's on in the background. Fuck. Maybe that was the problem. I'll have to rectify that for next time. I might actually have to change the settings of the live stream as well. Because my live stream settings are kind of set to like pretty high gigabytes or whatever. But yeah, no, that was awesome. We got Harrison Faulkner kicking off the space, talking about his band podcast. Anybody who deviates from the official narrative gets banned. You get your podcast taken down. And he's part of like a major platform. He helped educate me a little bit on sort of the precedent of this Holocaust denial, or not Holocaust, rather residential school denialism, with the motion that was passed back in 2021 that all conservatives agreed with. We got Jim McMurdy on. We got to hear his testimony. The lore, the Jim McMurdy lore is incredible, is it not? His dad was esteemed to the Order of Canada. And like, yeah, that was incredible. Not gonna lie. Ferryman came on, kind of mogged the space a little bit, kind of mogged it up, kind of was like, I'm gonna be an uncompromising Anglo-Saxon, but yeah, I mean, it's pretty hard to argue with some of the stuff that he says, you know. But yeah, we had Jim McMurdy on, telling his story. We almost had all the guests hop on. You know, Rachel gave her story. She was co-hosting. She gave her story of being canceled. We got Mark Emery on. And Mark Emery is kind of becoming a little bit, I guess, racially conscious. And I'm really grateful that Chanel came on to give her perspective. And I'm really glad. That she pushed back. She's like, this feels too like racial centric, like what's going on here. And I appreciate that. I think it's healthy. What's the one thing was it McMurdy or was it Mark? I think it was McMurdy. It's McMurtry, right? I'm not even saying it right. But I tweeted it out when he said it. He says, like, in Canada, we're losing the art. Canada has lost the art of disagreement. I don't think it's just Canada. I think it's kind of across the Western world that, you know, there literally isn't good debates anymore. Like, you really cannot find a good debate, not in the mainstream anyway, not to save your life. But no, it was good. It was good. We'll have to do another one. Let's go through here. Is there any super chats? I saw Silverman sent a huge super chat. Thank you so much. Yeah, maybe we can quickly do that. Can we do that? Is this up? Boom. Whoops. Hold on. Let's bring something up here because I saw some donations roll in. On the Give, Send, Go. We got Satoshi Ape with $50. Can't wait for the finished product. Same here, sir. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be streaming on Amazon Video, and it's you know, if we reach our higher budget goals, then we'll be able to submit it to film festivals and everything. So it'll be really good. Anonymous Givers gives $100. Good work, Greg. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Assuming your gender, sir. Drew Galoo Dag sends $100. Keep fighting, brother. Guys, thank you so much for these huge donations. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's lots in the works. I hope you've recognized the hard work I'm putting into this to get the voices out there. And you know how we'll know if this Twitter Spaces is a success is if there's people smearing us tomorrow. If there's people smearing us Monday about, this person went on a podcast, they associated with each other and they said the things that you're not supposed to say. Cancel culture, cancel them. Don't allow this. Don't allow these people having a conversation about free speech, about how, hey, a lot of what's going on is kind of has a little bit of a sort of, you know, demonizing white people thing going on, and anybody who questions history gets demonized. And yeah, can't have that. Can't have conversations like that. Not at all. But I do want to thank everybody for coming out. I wish I could have closed the space. That sucks. That really sucks. I'm an asshole, to be honest. The fact that the space just ended with some poor guest in mid-sentence getting cut off and just nuked. What a great way to end the space, Greg. Fantastic. Great work. But yeah, I think I'll still leave it up. I think it was I think we touched on a lot of great conversations. Thank you for the $2. One more quarter. Appreciate your work. Gotta go. Thanks for watching. One more quarter. And yeah, guys, thank you for watching. How long have we been streaming for? 3 hours. 3 hours. Okay. Yeah, we had a couple guests on there. The one person that didn't make it was Pamela Geiger. She is an Indigenous woman, part Indigenous. I interviewed her recently at a PPC event. She's running as a PPC candidate, and she was really cooking when it comes to, she was actually, it's too bad she didn't come on, because she was actually really sympathetic to Truth and Reconciliation Day being part Indigenous, and it really sucks we didn't get to hear that perspective on it, because, and to be fair, maybe I should have pushed back more against Ferryman's sort of summary of the situation, only because he said, like, I wish we wouldn't be living with the Indigenous people, like we shouldn't have even helped them at all. And it's like, well, that's so far away from our reality, though, because we did do that, and that did do what happened. And I do have sympathy for the Indigenous people and how poorly they are treated. And it's like, hey, they were colonized. We're getting colonized right now. You know what I mean? Like there is actually a common sort of natural unity there. And also with the whole thing of, yeah, that would have been actually interesting to kind of have that argument, because what does Ferryman believe? We should have just like wiped them all out or something, and that they didn't have any rights to their land or something. I don't know. I'm not sure. That's a discussion for another time. Because that's what we do. We discuss topics, even if they're offensive, even if they make you flinch, even if they make you feel, oh, you can't say that. You're not allowed to say that. Hey, man, you're not allowed to say that, man. Well, I just did. Now what? Now what's going to happen? Yeah, guys, thanks for watching. I'm going to end the stream here. Appreciate you. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks you so much for the support, the donations. And I'll see you on the Anti-Hate homepage tomorrow morning. Until next time. There's no music. And yeah, hey, if you wanna support what we're doing, go to SaveFreeSpeech.ca, click the donate button, go to GiveSendGo.com/SaveFreeSpeech, all that fun stuff, all of it. Help support the documentary at GiveSendGo.com/SaveFreeSpeech. Working with an award-winning filmmaker, we are exposing the far left ideologues who are messing with our institutions. Yeah. So until next time, guys. Until next time, thanks for watching.
You know just how
oh man, I'm hungry.